Chapter 869. Second Uncle Goose said to Yang Fan, "Young Master Shin once praised Ah Lang in front of old great-grandfather Chui as a talented and promising young man. Seeing you today, you truly live up to your reputation." When Yang Fan heard the words, "Young Master Shen," he immediately dispelled the thought of leaving. In this day and age, people with a bit of money did not have the right to be called young master. There were probably no more than 100 young people with the surname Shin who had the right to be called young master. And among these 100 young master Shin, there was only one person in the world who had the chance to see old great-grandfather Chui and use an equal status to evaluate others, Shin Mu. It had been a long time since Yang Fan had seen Shin Mu. When he and Master Chui had been fighting for the position of the sect leader of the Xian sect, Shin Mu had been active in the area of Exen Luo and Goryeo. Supposedly this was a punishment. Yang Fan had been busy fighting for power with young Master Chui and did not pay attention to him. In reality, even if there was not a series of events that took up Yang Fan's attention, he would not pay special attention to news of young Master Shin, because in his heart he had never thought of Shin Mu as someone he should be wary of. Hearing Second Uncle Goo's words, Yang Fan's heart moved and he blurted out, "Second Uncle, are you talking about young Master Shin Mu?" Second Uncle Gu said fearfully, "But I really do not deserve Ah Lang's title." "Ah Lang is right, this lowly one is talking about young Master Shin Mu." Yang Fan was overjoyed when he heard this. He did not have time to argue with him about the title and hurriedly asked, "Shin Mu has returned from Silla? Where did Second Uncle see him?" Seeing that he insisted on calling him Second Uncle, Second Uncle Gu did not continue to be humble and said, "This lowly one saw young Master Shin at the Chui residence. Speaking of which, it has been a while, probably." One of them called the other Second Uncle, and the other called himself Lowly One. This title was very strange, but the two people involved seemed to be very used to it. Second Uncle Gu rolled his eyes and thought for a moment, saying, This lowly one can't remember the exact time. But this lowly one remembers that the Khitans rebelled in less than a month." Yang Fan was startled. He had thought that Shin Mu had just returned from Xinlua, but according to Second Uncle Gu, Shin Mu had returned a month before the Khitans rebelled. That meant that he had already been back for a year. Noticing Yang Fan's strange expression, Second Uncle Gu couldn't help but ask, "Ah Lang, what's wrong?" Yang Fan composed himself and said, "Oh, young Master Shin and I are old acquaintances. It's been a long time since we last met. If he had returned, she would find a time to meet him. It's just that I don't know if his visit to Chui Taigong is just an occasional trip from Xinlua, or is he returning to the Central Plains?" Second Uncle Gu thought for a moment, then said he should be back soon. "This lowly one's leg is crippled, so it's hard for me to move around. Thanks to the care of my grandfather, I usually trim the plants and flowers in the backyard." That day, this lowly one was busy among the flowers and plants. Young Master Shin Mu and my grandfather were sitting beside me. My grandfather congratulated him on his return to the Central Plains and warned him not to make the mistake of being young and impetuous again and do something that will shake the capital. So that's how it is. A bitter taste rose in Yang Fan's heart, but a smile appeared on his face. "Uncle Gu, Second Uncle Gu, you should settle down in the residence. Tomorrow I will arrange for 1,000 riders to be on duty in the palace, so things will be a little busy. After I'm done with my work for a few days, I will go with you to the Yamen to get a contract to release your slave status." The Gu brothers thanked him profusely, their gratitude evident in their words. Yang Fan smiled and nodded at them. Just as he was about to leave, Gu Zhuting suddenly took a step forward and bent both her legs, wanting to kneel in front of him. Yang Fan hurriedly reached out to support her, rebuking her. "You're doing it again. I've already said that this is a reward for your meritorious service. You deserve it, so you don't have to be so polite. I won't arrange any tasks for you these few days. You should spend more time with your family. In addition, You can also discuss what you plan to do in the future. Once you've discussed it, just tell me. As long as I can help, I won't refuse. Yes. Thank you, Alang. Gu Zhuting choked with sobs. Her eyes were red as she withdrew her hand and wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. Then, she glanced at Yang Fan with affection. Gu Zhang, who was standing to the side, happened to see his daughter's eyes, and his heart suddenly moved. His daughter had always been strong-willed, and since she was young, she had made a vow that she would never marry. Even as her father, he couldn't do anything about her stubbornness. But looking at her now, she had never seen her daughter like this before. Gu Zhang looked at Yang Fan's back as he left in a hurry, and then looked at his daughter, who was still staring at Yang Fan's back. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "Is Xiaoting really just a subordinate of Lang? Lang promoted my family as a good family. Is it really just because Xiaoting made meritorious service for him?" But when he looked at his daughter again, her eyebrows were knitted, her waist was straight, her neck was slender, and her back was straight. Her shoulders and chest were tucked in, and her legs were tightly closed. There were also 2 faint traces of virginity near her chin. If she had lost her virginity, she definitely wouldn't have such a phenomenon. He couldn't help but be puzzled. When Yang Fan went out of the mansion, he suddenly whipped the horse. The horse immediately galloped out of the long alley and galloped into the main street. It was almost dusk, and the pedestrians had returned to the square. There were few people on the street. The setting sun shone on the tall Dubhe in the distance. Yang Fan galloped his horse and galloped out of the Anqi Gate in the north of Luoyang City. Only then did he let out a long sigh of relief, and his hot face also returned to normal. Shenmu was back. He had actually been back for almost a year. But Shenmu, who had frequent contact with Yang Fan in the past and shared the same ambition of overthrowing Wu Zhou's rule and rebuilding Li Tang's empire, had never met Yang Fan. Shenmu didn't even send him a message. What was even more strange was that Yang Fan actually didn't know about this matter. He was now the sovereign of the obvious sect, and there were many areas where he would have to interact with Shenmu, the sovereign of the hidden sect. His personal relationship with Shenmu had always been good. Whether it was official or personal, there was no reason for Shenmu not to meet him or not to communicate with him. Yang Fan had always regarded Shenmu as a friend and even a brother. This made him feel a sense of humiliation and anger from being betrayed. At the same time, he also had a kind of fear that made his hair stand on end. What role did the succession hall play in this matter? No matter how powerful Shenmu was, since he had returned, it was impossible for the clan heads and elders of the 7 sects and 5 families not to know about this matter. But everyone seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally ignored him. No one told him this news. What kind of situation was this? Lang. Ren Wei rode his horse and caught up. When he saw Yang Fan's gloomy expression, he didn't know why Yang Fan was suddenly unhappy and couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Yang Fan raised his head and looked at the sky that was as red as blood. He said to Ren Wei, "Ride slowly. I want some peace and quiet." "Yes." Ren Wei responded and raised his hand. A few guards immediately pulled on the reins and slowed down their speed, pulling a distance away from Yang Fan. Anyway, it was a flat plain in front of them, and the weeds didn't even reach their knees. If there was any ambush, they would be able to see it from afar. There was no need to follow closely. They were originally sent to protect Yang Fan. Now that they had a military position and Yang Fan's private teaching and public display of power, these people were now completely loyal to him. Of course, if Yang Fan and the 7 sects and 5 families were in conflict, it was hard to say which side these guards from the 7 big families would stand on. After all, not only were they from the 7 big families, but their parents, brothers, and children were also in the 7 big families. It was equivalent to having people holding them hostage. But unless Yang Fan became the emperor himself, there was no way he could oppose the 7 big families. Yang Fan had already left the city, so there was no need to worry about the problem of the city gates being locked. As for the time when he returned to the military camp, it didn't matter if it was later or earlier. After all, he was the commander-in-chief of the army. General Ma Shuliang, who was in charge of military discipline, could treat his old comrade Huang Xuchang equally, but he had to turn a blind eye to him. Yang Fan was leisurely riding on the reins. It looked as if he suddenly had the mood to enjoy the scenery of the suburbs, but his mind was no longer moved by external things. He was completely immersed in his own thoughts. Gradually, the resentment in Yang Fan's heart dissipated. Yes, perhaps it was because he had lost his footing at a young age, or perhaps it was because he didn't have any brothers or sisters, so it was easy for him to automatically replace Shenmu's help and appreciation with a kind of friendship and brotherly affection. But what was the original purpose of Shenmu's appreciation and cooperation with him? Shenmu was close to him and valued him because of the connections and ability that he had shown, which made Shenmu feel that he had value. No matter what means Shenmu used, even if he was close to him wholeheartedly, it was still inseparable from this purpose. Perhaps Shenmu had planned to cultivate him into a capable subordinate at that time. But what happened in the end? When Shenmu was banished to Xinlua, Yang Fan and young Master Jiang had a direct conflict. Moreover, because he was in charge of the allocation of officials that the 7 great families urgently needed, and young Master Jiang began to be hated and abandoned by the 7 great families after a series of mistakes. This was the result of a freak combination of factors. From that moment on, he began to become Shenmu's opponent. Yang Fan now knew how humble Shenmu's original identity was, and how he rose step by step until he was a subordinate of young Master Jiang, and gradually possessed the ability to compete with him as an equal. Yang Fan remembered Zhao Yu and little Fei Jiangzhang Yi. Under Shenmu, there was also a group of relatives and subordinates. They wept together and went through thick and thin. Their relationship was deeper than his and Shenmu's. Now that he had replaced young Master Jiang and stood on the opposite side of Shenmu, if he was Shenmu, what would he do? Hand over his power? Those brothers who risked their lives and went through fire and water for him, who didn't want to stand out, who didn't want to earn a family business. Their interests, Shenmu's own interests, were sacrificed because of Yang Fan? He and Shenmu did not have such a deep friendship, even if he was Shenmu's biological brother. If the relationship between them was reversed, could Yang Fan sacrifice Chu Kuanga and Ma Qiao's future for the friendship between him and Shenmu? Hand over more than 20 shops that Xiao Man had painstakingly managed, hand over all his connections to Shenmu, and willingly follow Shenmu's orders from then on? After thinking this through, Yang Fan immediately calmed down. Once the emotions of grief and resentment were eliminated, his mind became clear. Shenmu did not do anything wrong from Shenmu's point of view. Similarly, from his point of view, he should do something about it. Chapter 870. Early the next morning, facing the rising sun, a mighty and majestic army marched into Luoyang City. As soon as the troops entered the city, their strong military posture, solemn and unique military attire, and orderly troops that were like a forest that could topple a mountain attracted the attention of the people of Luoyang. Soon they heard that these were the 100 horsemen of the past and the 1,000 horsemen of today. It was said that these were the imperial guards that the emperor used the most. Yang Fan first led the army to the Featherwood Guard to collect the Kanhi and Tortoise talismans, and then led the soldiers into the city to receive the Black Tortoise Gate. In the past, the Black Tortoise Gate had always been guarded by the 100 horsemen. When the 100 horsemen were transferred to form the 1,000 horsemen, the Black Tortoise Gate was temporarily handed over to the Featherwood Guard to guard. Now that the army was established, it was only natural that they would take over again. The former soldiers of the 100 horsemen had all been promoted. The original 100 horsemen had now become cooks, and each of them was in charge of 10 people. Now they led their own teams and led them on a quiet patrol around the palace, familiarizing them with the roads, the palace rooms, and the restricted areas. They explained to them the route and the rules of the night patrol, as well as the locking of the palace doors. In fact, guarding the Black Tortoise Gate did not require 1,000 soldiers, unless it was a special time, such as when there was a great turmoil in the capital. Yang Fan had brought them all here today to let all the soldiers familiarize themselves with the situation in the palace and understand the residences of the emperor and the important people in the palace. This way, if there were any changes, they would be able to protect the target in time. As the commander of the 1,000 riders, Yang Fan was responsible for the military affairs of the 1,000 riders. Normally, he did not need to guard the Black Tortoise Gate. Of course, if he wanted to, he could enter the palace at any time before the gate was locked. This was what Warner liked the most. Otherwise, the palace gate was as deep as the heavens, and it would be as difficult as the cowherd and the weaver girl meeting on the bridge of the Magpies. Although Yang Fan did not need to be on duty at the Black Tortoise Gate every day, as the most important gate in the palace, a Lang general was required to stay here every day to keep watch. There were 5 Lang generals in the 1,000 cavalry guards, and they took turns to be on duty. When it was almost dusk, General Su Liang brought 900 soldiers out of the city. Outside of the northern part of the city was the Imperial Guard's encampment, and the distance from the Imperial city varied. Among them, the closest was the Featherwood Guard, and within the Featherwood Guard, the 1,000 horseman camp was the closest. Inside the 1,000 horseman camp, there was a seal that was usually sealed. At least one of the middle minister generals and the chief of censorates must be present. In addition to at least 3 minister generals must be present at the same time to open it. Only when all the above people sign their names can it take effect. Even Grand General Wu Yui of the Featherwood Guard did not have this sort of troop deployment checklist. This was for when an emergency occurred in the palace and the emperor was unable to issue the tiger seal to mobilize troops. The 1,000 horseman camp would automatically decide whether or not to dispatch troops. As long as a majority of the high-ranking officers agreed, this checklist could mobilize the troops and horses of the headquarters and make an exception to enter the city at night. In the emperor's view, it was impossible for 1,000 people to rebel. Once there was a change in the palace, 1,000 people, relying on the strength of the palace, would be enough to protect her safety until she understood the situation and sent an army to rescue the emperor. That was why the 1,000 cavalry camp had such an advantage. Su Liang brought his men back to the barracks, but Yang Fan remained in the city. In reality, he was now a soldier. Although his family was in the city, it was not legal for him to casually return to the manor or stay overnight at home. However, Wu Zetian had also given him the title of disciplinary commissioner for rectifying misconduct. How could he rectify misconduct if he stayed in the barracks all day? It should be known that the night patrols of the Jinwu guards were also within the scope of his supervision. With this reason, he could openly stay in the city without fear of being impeached by the imperial censors. However, his main task was still with the 1,000 horsemen. Even if no one impeached him, it was still inconvenient for him to stay overnight in the city, unless he was willing to lose the power of the 1,000 horsemen. When Yang Fan returned to the Yang Manor, he went straight to the study. The study was assigned a little page boy who was usually only responsible for serving tea and sweeping the room. He was Steward Nio's little grandson. When he saw Ah Lang immediately rush to the study after returning to the manor, the little boy knew that his master was either going to have a guest or had important business to attend to. So he immediately lit an incense burner and gently placed it on the low table before making a cup of tea for him. A faint fragrance spread out and had a calming effect. Yang Fan picked up the teacup and took a sip. As the slightly astringent and fragrant tea entered his mouth, he suddenly remembered that this way of drinking tea was taught to him by Shinmu. The tea that the high nobles and Diana masters drank nowadays was a bit too strong. He was not used to it. Yang Fan thoughtfully took another sip of tea. The cigarette smoke floated in front of him and gently transformed into different shapes in the air. Sometimes it was like a cloud, sometimes it was like a word, and sometimes it was like a face. Yang Fan looked at that face and vaguely saw the young Master Jiang that he had not seen in a long time smiling at him. I lost. Defeat after defeat, defeat after defeat, until I was utterly defeated and even my foundation was lost. Otherwise, those old ghosts of the 5 families and 7 sects would not have abandoned me. How would you have had the chance to fight for my position?" The face was twisted like the face of a devil laughing savagely. "Now it is up to you. You have replaced me, so you have to shoulder the responsibility that I should have. But he has been back for a year and you have not heard anything. It seems that those old bastards are more inclined to train him between you and him. I really want to see your end, ha 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 ha." Yang Fan gently exhaled. The devil's face in front of him was blown away. Yang Fan started to think quietly. Why did Shin Mu deliberately hide his tracks when he returned to the Central Plains? Yang Fan put himself in Shin Mu's shoes and analyzed in reverse. This way, it was easier for him to grasp the other's mentality. Only by understanding the other's mentality could he decide what countermeasures to take next. I replaced the position of young Master Jiang and had to protect the interests of the people of the Xian sect. Shin Mu was not willing to be under the Xian sect and rose up step by step until he was on equal footing with young Master Jiang. In the end, there was a fierce battle in Chang'an. Young Master Jiang was forced to give up most of his foundation in Chang, and then ran to Luoyang in hopes of making a comeback. Shin Mu was also punished and was exiled to Xen Luo. But at this time, I replaced young Master Jiang and became the master of the Xian sect. While Shen Mu and I have similar intentions in court, in terms of the specific interests of the two groups, we became the greatest competitors. He had to be on guard against me. He was able to defeat young Master Jiang mostly because of his intelligence and using young Master Jiang's arrogance. In summary, the hidden sect was born from the Xian sect, but its foundation is not as deep as the Xian sect. So he is on guard against me because he does not know what position I will have against him after I take control of the Xian sect. As long as he is not stupid, he will not jump out to see me first and ask me for an explanation. He should first observe me in the dark and understand my temperament, ambitions, and goals. At the same time, he will consolidate the hidden sect's foundation in Chang and to prepare for any eventualities. When he is fully prepared and knows my temperament like the back of his hand, he will then be as confident as when he dealt with young Master Jiang. When Yang Fan thought of this, his brows slightly knitted together. However, this is only the best plan. Everything must be prepared for the worst. What if Shin Mu's goal isn't just this? What if, after young Master Jiang failed, his ambitions grew, and he wants to catch up from behind and use the hidden sect to swallow up the Xian sect? Yang Fan stood up and slowly paced in the study room. If he has such a plan, then it is reasonable for him to conceal his whereabouts and consolidate his foundation, increase his strength, and even attempt to attack me when I am not vigilant. I have to prepare for the worst. After Yang Fan analyzed Shen Mu's goal, he immediately analyzed the mentality of the 7 sects and 5 families. It was impossible for them not to know that Shin Mu had returned. However, everyone had coincidentally concealed this information from him. What was their attitude? It should be known that no matter if it was Shan Mu or him, no matter how they jumped around, it was impossible for them to escape from the 7 sects and 5 families. Therefore, their attitude was extremely important. If they wanted to protect Shin Mu and abandon him, Yang Fan, then he wouldn't have to put in any effort to fight for it. He could just withdraw from the Xian sect and obediently be a wealthy man in Luoyang, who also had a bright future as a general of the imperial army. However, if the 7 sects and 5 families had such a plan, with his current shallow foundation in the succession hall, it would only take a word from those clan heads. Why would Shin Mu act as if he was facing a great enemy? After thinking for a long time, Yang Fan gradually grasped the pulse of the clan heads of the 7 sects and 5 families. They cannot bear to see me, who is gradually growing in power in the court, but they also do not wish for one clan to be dominant. Shan Mu and young Master Jiang had used food as a weapon to start a business war in Chang, and young Master Jiang had lost, but it was impossible for Shin Mu to come out unscathed. Even if he won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory and he would be greatly injured. There were at least 3 reasons why the 7 sects and 5 families had chased him to Shinloa as a punishment. First, their fighting had already harmed the interests of the 7 sects and 5 families, and they had to be punished. Otherwise, if they were allowed to fight openly and secretly, it would go against the original intentions of the 7 sects and 5 families in establishing the succession hall. Second, they did not want Shinmu to kill young Master Jiang. Regardless of whether the Xian sect or the hidden sect had the upper hand, they were all on their side, and it did not matter. However, this kind of balance was what the prestigious families hoped for. They did not want any of the factions to be too powerful to handle. Third, to open up the Shinlo market, it was probably to allow Shinmu to compensate for the losses suffered by the various prestigious families in this fight. Yang Fan pondered for a long time and felt that this was the most likely intention of those clan heads. Then there could only be one motive for them to allow Shinmu to quietly return to the Central Plains to carry out his activities and to conceal this information from him. They wanted to give Shinmu a chance to recover. He now had an official identity, and it looked like his future was getting brighter and brighter. He also had a close relationship with a few influential factions in the imperial court. In the eyes of the clan heads, the hardest person to restrain in the future was not Shinmu, but him. Therefore, they needed the powerful hidden sect to restrain them. Back then, when the hidden sect grew stronger step by step under their noses, they probably added fuel to the fire in the dark and provided assistance, right? However, back then, their motive was to restrain the arrogant, stubborn, and powerful young Master Jiang. Now it was Yang Fan's turn. When he thought of this, Yang Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. In their eyes, a boy with the surname Yang who has no roots and no background, is already as influential as young Master Jiang who has the Fanyang Lu clan's backing? That was what the clan heads thought, but did Shenmu think the same? If he wanted to control the obvious sect, once he succeeded, he would be able to smoothly control the entire succession hall with his foundation of complete control over the hidden sect. By then, even if the 7 sects and 5 families opposed this situation, they wouldn't be able to easily fall out with him. Furthermore, among the 7 sects and 5 families, at least the Longshili clan was Shenmu's backer. The 7 sects and 5 families were playing with fire. Yang Fan let out a long sigh and thought to himself, all right then, if you want to fight, then let's have a fight first. Whether it's a fight or a draw, we have to have a fight first. In terms of age, I can only be your younger brother, but in terms of anything else, I will not allow you to ride on my head. Chapter 871. Anyo. Yang Fan made up his mind and called out to the outside of the screen. The servant, Anyo, was sitting on a stool outside the screen, looking after the fire. When he heard Yang Fan's call, he quickly ran in and stared at Yang Fan with wide eyes. This servant came from the countryside and was illiterate. He was not qualified to be a servant, but he was honest and obedient. Yang Fan did not usually study, so he did not care about this. Yang Fan said, "Go and ask Miss Gu to come here." "Oh." The little servant answered and hurriedly ran out. Yang Fan was determined to fight back. Firstly, he was worried that Shenmu would take advantage of him. Shenmu had quietly returned for more than a year. He must be on guard against him with ulterior motives. Moreover, he did not like the feeling of being schemed against. He especially did not like being manipulated by others. Personality was something that determined a person's actions to a large extent. It was even more important than reason. When Princess Taiping wanted to make him her little lover, Yang Fan was disgusted and opposed it because of his personality. It was the same now. Anyo hurriedly ran out of the study, but before he could step out of the courtyard, he bumped into someone's embrace. He looked up and saw a white-haired, burly old man with only one arm. The old man used his remaining arm to support him and said with a smile, "You brat, why are you so rash?" The boy did not recognize the old man, but someone came out from behind the old man and asked with a smile, "Anyo, where are you going?" When Anyo saw the person, he was delighted. He called out, according to the countryside custom, "Eldest aunt, Ah Lang asked me to look for you." The person was Gu Zhuting. Gu Zhuting said, "My father and second uncle are going to see Ah Lang. Please go and inform them." Oh! Anyo turned around and ran back. When Yang Fan heard that the Gu brothers had come, he pondered for a while and replied, "I know. Go and ask Miss Gu to come in first. As for the two elders, ask them to go back first. Tell them that I will visit them later." Oh! Anyo turned around again and ran outside. By this time, Gu Zhuting, father and daughter, 3 people had already arrived at the veranda. Anyo stood still in the veranda and loudly said, "Gu de Gu, Ah Lang said that he only wants to see you. Tell the 2 uncles to go back first and wait. After Ah Lang has seen you, he will go and pay his respects to them." Gu Zhang was very surprised. He looked at his brother and then said to his daughter, "Since Ah Lang has given the order, you go first. Your uncle and I will go back and wait." Gu Zhuting nodded and stepped into the room. Yang Fan guessed that Gu Zhang and his brother were here to talk about getting rid of their slave registration and their future living arrangements. He now wanted to strengthen his control over the succession hall and start a tacit contest with Shenmu. This was the time when he needed people. The Gu family was very familiar with the situation of the aristocratic families and would be of great help to him. Therefore, he did not want to let the Gu family freely choose. If he met them first and listened to their intentions, such as Gu Zhang wanting to sell date cakes and second Uncle Gu wanting to carry a pole to sell vegetables, Yang Fan would not be able to stop them. Then he would lose a group of extremely capable helpers. It would be better to talk to Miss Gu first and test her opinion. If the Gu family did not want to continue living on the edge of a knife, he could also make a request. At least, he would need them to help him get through this obstacle first. "Oh, Miss Gu is here. Sit down and talk." Seeing Gu Zhuting come in, Yang Fan stood up with a smile. Although he had the intention to use the Gu family, he had previously agreed to let the Gu family choose their own way of living in the future. Now that he wanted them to help him, it felt a bit like he was holding a debt of gratitude. Feeling flattered, Gu Zhuting thanked Ah Lang and gently sat down on a seat nearby. She bit her lower lip and looked at her toes that were peeking out of the hem of her skirt as she said, "Ah Lang, I have discussed with my father and uncle about the future arrangements. I came here today to report to Ah Lang. May I know why Ah Lang has summoned me alone?" Yang Fan's heart tightened and he said, "I have something to discuss with you. However, this matter isn't urgent. Tell me, what did your father and uncle decide?" Gu Zhuting said, "This servant's father and uncle have discussed it carefully. I don't know if Ah Lang still needs people. Our family is willing to work for Ah Lang." Yang Fan was delighted. He suppressed his joy and calmly asked, "Work for me? What do you mean?" My family has more than 20 shops in Nan City. It's still possible to arrange a few people." Gu Zhuting shook her head and glanced at Yang Fan. She said, "Ah Lang's kindness to my Gu family is as heavy as a mountain. My father and uncle have always wanted to repay it, but we can only use our flying eaves and vaulting over walls for Ah Lang's use. There's really nothing we can do to repay him. Therefore, in the Hall of Succession, although Ah Lang had a lot of men at his disposal, they were, after all, involved with the 7 big families, so he could not command them as if they were his own arms. Otherwise, when the Prince of Luling returned to the capital that day, Ah Lang would not have to personally take the risk, but he would not dare to use one of them. The Gu family is willing to work for Ah Lang to repay his kindness. At the same time, I don't dare to hide it from Ah Lang. Although we don't practice martial arts, we were originally working as servants in the Chui family's manor. If we really ask them to leave and live alone in Loyang, it won't be easy to find a job." Gu Zhuting smiled bitterly. She said, "Uncle is a gardener and disabled. No one is willing to take him in. As for my father, he only knows how to kill people and has never learned anything else. He's so old, but he doesn't know how to farm work, or run a business. Yesterday, I thought about it for a whole day and couldn't think of anything else he could do other than this. But Yang Fan didn't expect the Gu family's plan to coincide with his. He was overjoyed when he heard Gu Zhuting say hesitantly, but he hurriedly asked, "But what?" Gu Zhuting said, "However, this agreement can only be limited to my father and daughter's generation. The next generation is still children. It's not too late to let them learn 100 things now and have a proper life in the future. My Gu family is willing to be used by Ah Lang, but I hope that the Gu family's descendants can do something else. This life of licking blood on the edge of a knife is really—" At this point, Gu Zhuting was on the verge of tears. Yang Fan nodded solemnly and said, "All right. To be honest, I've only been running the succession hall for a short period of time. There are some matters that I don't want my trusted subordinates to handle. Right now, I have an important matter that I need your family's help. Today, I asked you to meet me alone because of this. I didn't expect you to have the same plan. Since it's like this, let's go see your father." Gu Zhuting hurriedly stood up and said, "How could I dare to trouble Ah Lang? Your servant will go and call my father." Yang Fan shook his head and said, "You can't. Remember, you're no longer anyone's slaves. Since I want to marry your father, I should go and pay my respects." Gu Zhuting was indescribably grateful. Her eyes were brimming with tears. Her knees went soft, and she wanted to kowtow again. Yang Fan hurriedly held her up and said, "I've already said it. Why do you want to kowtow again?" Gu Zhuting said, "Your great kindness. I really don't know how to repay it." Yang Fan was helpless and could only shake his head and sigh. Once slavery was deeply rooted in one's bones, it was not something that could be changed just by changing one's identity. Elder Gu and his brother walked back. The two of them walked in silence for a while. Suddenly, Gu Er said without any rhyme or reason, "Big brother, I think what you said makes sense." Elder Gu was thinking about something and asked casually, "What did I say is right?" Gu Er said, "It's that shouting might have something going on with Ah Lang." "Oh!" Elder Gu touched his nose and did not say anything. Gu Er said, "From the looks of it, our shouting isn't just a burning stick. Ah Lang is also a little interested in her." Elder Gu guessed, "That can't be right. With shouting's background, how could she have such good fortune?" Gu Er said, "That's why Ah Lang wants to help our family get rid of slavery. Think about it. It's not difficult for a master to help a slave get rid of slavery. However, it's a great favor to get a few slaves from someone else to help them get rid of slavery. That person is from the Qinghe Chui family. This favor is even greater. If it wasn't for something, would Ah Lang owe the Chui family a favor? Is it so easy to owe the Chui family a favor?" Elder Gu was doubtful. He felt excited, but was also afraid that it was all for naught. He said nervously, "In the end, isn't it just your wishful thinking? Maybe it's because shouting has done him a great service and Ah Lang is a person who rewards meritorious deeds. That's why he gave us such a great favor." Gu Er rolled his eyes at him and said, "Brother, don't look down on yourself too much. Our family doesn't have a great background, but if we get rid of slavery, we'll be good people in the future. Our family doesn't have much status, but with Shouting's looks, she can be Ah Lang's concubine, make his bed and serve his food. It's not considered climbing up the social ladder, right?" Old Man Gu said, "Little Ting is quite handsome, but it's a pity that she's a little old. With Ah Lang's current status and wealth, isn't it a piece of cake for him to get a few 13 or 14-year-old girls as his concubines? Especially since Ah Lang is so young and handsome." Gu Er said impatiently, "Then tell me, why did Ah Lang ask us to go back first and visit you later? Right now we are still Ah Lang's slaves. Is there a need to do this? With such thorough etiquette, there must be something to it. I think, although the concubine's father can't be considered a proper father-in-law, Ah Lang is a well-mannered man, so he didn't want to neglect us." Elder Gu began to agree with his idea. He stroked his beard and was secretly delighted. Gu Er fully unleashed his imagination and continued to analyze. You said that as soon as Ah Lang returned, he didn't even go to the back courtyard but went to the study to see shouting. What does he mean by visiting you right after? I guess Ah Lang wants to tell you that he wants to take shouting as his concubine. Hearing this, Elder Gu panicked and said, Then if he tells me, what should I do? Gu Er said, You can be a good father-in-law. Elder Gu hastily said, You can be a good father-in-law. Of course you can be a good man. This is a good thing that is hard to find. If our family can really climb up the social ladder, I mean if son-in-law comes to visit me, what should I do? Gu Er said, You go back first and change into new clothes. When son-in-law comes, we'll act according to the circumstances. Don't agree so easily, you must be a bit reserved, so that you won't disgrace our shouting. You must speak tactfully. Don't annoy Ah Lang and ruin our Mrs. Affair. Elder Gu panicked and said, Speak? I don't know how to speak, Xiongdi. All my life, I only know how to kill people, I don't know how to speak. How about you speak on my behalf? What are you talking about? You are Xiaoding's father. You are not dead, yet you are still standing here. Who do I think I am? Let's go back first and think carefully about how to answer Ah Lang. The two brothers, one with only one arm and the other with a lame leg, could be said to be crippled by heaven and the earth. They excitedly returned to the guest room arranged for them, waiting for the new son-in-law to visit them. Chapter 872. Yang Fan and Gu Zhuting finished their discussion and hurried to the Gu family's guest house. This guest house had its own courtyard and could accommodate 4 or 5 guests and their attendants. As soon as the Gu family arrived, it became their home, and the entire courtyard was occupied by the Gu family. As soon as Yang Fan entered the courtyard, several children who were playing in the courtyard called out, Ah Lang is here! Then they ran to the room to report the news. A middle-aged woman who was drying clothes in the courtyard saw Yang Fan come in and quickly wiped her hands on her apron and bowed to him. Yang Fan had some impression of this woman. She seemed to be one of Gu Zhuting's sisters-in-law, so he politely nodded to her. Inside the main room, old man Gu, who had already changed into a new set of clothes, was very uneasy. When he heard that Yang Fan had arrived, he subconsciously wanted to go out to welcome him. But second uncle Gu hurriedly reminded him, You're about to become Ah Lang's elder. You can't go out to welcome him. You should wait at the door. Old man Gu quickly stopped and waited by the door. Yang Fan stepped into the living room and saw old man Gu standing there. He quickly cupped his hands and said with a smile, Father-in-law, sorry to keep you waiting. In ancient times, the word father-in-law had many meanings. It could be used to address one's father-in-law, one's elder, one's relative or elder. It could also be used to address one's parents or one's wife's husband, although it was not common. Old man Gu was prejudiced and naturally thought that it was the first meaning. If old man Gu was marrying off his daughter and the marriage contract had not been signed, it would be inappropriate for him to address him this way. But there were not so many rules for concubines, and there was no need for 3 matchmakers and 6 certificates. Old man Gu had married a wife and a daughter-in-law before, but at that time both parties were servants of the Chui family, so he did not know how to greet Yang Fan. After a moment of hesitation, he also cupped his hands and said, If Ah Lang has anything to say, just summon this old man. How could I dare to trouble you? Yang Fan said to old man Gu and second uncle Gu, Elders, you're too polite. Since you're here, don't treat yourself as an outsider. Treat this as your own home and be more casual. Come, let's sit down and talk. In Yang Fan's mind, the Gu family was about to be freed from slavery, and his second Madame Anu had always addressed Gu Zhuting as Master Gu, so there was no need to treat her as an outsider. Furthermore, he wanted to recruit the entire Gu family for his own use. It was only right for him to be courteous and humble. However, in the heart of Elder Gu, his initial judgment was confirmed. Yang Fan was the first to walk over and take a seat at the head of the table. He spoke to Elder Gu without beating around the bush. Just now, Miss Gu has already explained to me the intentions of the two elders. Right now, this Yang has an important matter to attend to, or perhaps I really do need the help of the Gu clan, so I will not be unreasonable. Let's settle this matter like this. Oh, all right. I'll listen to Ah Lang's arrangements. Elder Gu licked his lips and subconsciously glanced at his resourceful brother. Yang Fan saw that he wanted to say something, but hesitated, so he smiled knowingly and said, "Tomorrow morning, father-in-law and I will go to the yamen to settle the matter of freeing yourself from slavery. In addition, I plan to buy a house in this alley for father-in-law's family to live in. Father-in-law can first settle your family down. And for those who do not know martial arts, my wife can arrange for them to do whatever they can to earn a living." When Elder Gu heard that he was going to buy a house for himself, he thought, "This son-in-law of mine is indeed wealthy, and he seems to love his daughter very much. I remember that when 4th Master Chui took a concubine last month, he only gave the woman's family 20 strings of silver. A house is not cheap, especially in a place like Luoyang. Whether it was taking a wife or a concubine, betrothal gifts were required. It was just that taking a wife was called betrothal gifts, and taking a concubine was called buying a concubine's wealth. Regardless of the value or the meaning, there was a big difference. With the word buy, the concubine became a part of the family's property. If the master doted on the master and wanted to take the concubine as his wife, that was a crime and would be sentenced. If the concubine disobeyed her superior and was beaten to death by the master's wife, it was not a crime even if she reported it to the magistrate. If the master passed away and the master's wife was fierce, she would sell the concubine to someone else. That was a matter of course, and the other party was only disposing of their own property. Therefore, the concubines in the palace could still fight for it. After all, if you overthrew the empress, you would be the empress, the mother of the world, and no one above could restrain you. But as a concubine of a big family, unless the master was especially strong and the wife was especially weak, the concubine would stir up trouble, fight for favor and power. It was simply the imagination of the later generations. The reason why Old Man Gu was willing to let his daughter follow Yang Fan was firstly because he was extremely grateful to Yang Fan. Secondly, with Yang Fan's identity and status, coupled with his rare youth and good looks, his daughter would not be able to find a better shop if she missed this opportunity. Thirdly, this daughter had sworn not to marry since she was young and had long missed the age for a normal marriage. Now that she wanted to find a family of equal status, the only chance she had was to become the second wife of the family. For a small family like theirs, if there was a man of suitable age who was not married, then the other party's conditions could be imagined. As for the master's right to punish the concubine, although it was rare for a concubine to disobey her superior, it was also very rare for the master's wife to treat the concubine harshly. Even if extreme actions were in accordance with the law, they still had to consider the public opinion. The bigger the family, the more they would care about this, so there was no need to worry. Old Man Gu thought, "Ah Lang is willing to pay such a large sum of money. It shows how much he values shouting. Presumably, he will not neglect her in the future." Yang Fan saw that he seemed to be deep in thought and could not help but feel puzzled. He thought, "Logically speaking, my conditions are already very generous. Is Old Man Gu not satisfied? It can't be. I haven't even revealed my intention to recruit him, and he is already willing to work for me. How could he? Ah, that's right. Old Man Gu must be worried about his descendants." Thinking to this point, Yang Fan continued, "If there are any juniors in Old Man Gu's family who are willing to learn this trade, don't hesitate to tell my wife. She will arrange for them to be apprentices first. As long as Old Man Gu's family works for me, my monthly allowance will be very generous. Even if I take out some extra money, it will be enough to hire a teacher for my children. I wonder if Old Man Gu is satisfied?" Second Uncle Gu, who was sitting next to him, hastily said, "Ah Lang's kindness to our family is as heavy as a mountain. We should die for Ah Lang. Now that Ah Lang has arranged for our family so well, we are very satisfied, very satisfied." But Xiao Ting, Yang Fan said, From now on, with Old Man Gu's family supporting Yang, I do not need Miss Gu to be at my beck and call. After all, she is a woman. It is better not to show her face in public. However, I hope that after I buy a house for you, Miss Gu will still live in my mansion. There is no need for you to move there." When Yang Fan was in the study, he had consulted with Miss Gu. The Yang family currently had guards sent by the succession hall, but after all, they were not very considerate. There was no need to doubt Gu Zhuting's loyalty. Although his two wives knew martial arts, now that they had a child, it would be better to have someone close to them to take care of them. So he wanted to ask Miss Gu to stay in the Yang mansion for a few more days. But in the ears of the two Gu elders who had long strayed off the wrong path, the meaning was different. Normally, only a married wife would be allowed to live in her parents' home before the official marriage, and they would not see each other. Only after the official marriage would they bring her over. As for taking in a concubine, she could be brought into the mansion from the side door. She could not even go through the main door, so there was naturally no need to be so serious. In the two elders' minds, Yang Fan was now a respected figure in the officialdom, so he naturally could not break the rules, lest he be impeached. They remembered that when they were in the Chui mansion, they had heard that there was a high-ranking official in the imperial court who bought a piece of biscuit and ate it by the roadside before the court session. Because of this, he was impeached by the imperial censor for losing face in the imperial court, thus ruining his future. Although Old Man Gu was a little disappointed, the world was like this, so he could only say, "That's right, that's right. Everything should be done according to Ah Lang's idea. I am not an unreasonable person." Yang Fan nodded and said cheerfully, "Then let's do it this way. Tomorrow morning, I will go to the Yamen with Old Man Gu. I will take my leave first." Old Man Gu, second Uncle Gu, and Gu Zhuting sent Yang Fan out of the courtyard. Just as they returned to the hall, the curtain at the door was lifted and Mrs. Gu, who had been standing there listening to the news, walked out from the inner room. She hugged her daughter and said with tears of joy, "My dear, who asked you to be born into my family? You have always been a worry for me. This is great, this is great. General Yang is a high-ranking military officer, and he is young and handsome. I will have someone to rely on for life. Even if I die soon, I can rest in peace." Old Man Gu could not hide the joy in his heart, but he deliberately put on a stern face and glared at his wife, reprimanding, "Such a happy occasion. Why are you crying?" Gu Zhuting looked at her father and mother and said with a blank face, "Father, mother, what are you talking about?" After Yang Fan settled the matter with the Gu family, he returned to the study and asked the servant Anyo to summon Ren Wei. After a while, Ren Wei came to the study. Yang Fan asked Anyo to guard the door outside the study and ordered Ren Wei, "Pass my order immediately. Order the succession hall to move into Luoyang." Ren Wei was shocked and thought he had heard wrong. He could not help but cry out, "What?" Frankly speaking, only some of the higher-ups and some core disciples of the aristocratic families knew that Yang Fan had taken over the succession hall. It could be said that it was extremely quiet. Ever since Yang Fan became the clan master, he had only read the various reports sent by the succession hall. He had never expressed his own opinion. Most of the time, he only approved the reports according to the suggestions of the stewards. Yang Fan's way of doing things was very different from the original young Master Zhang's arbitrary way of doing things. The people in the succession hall almost treated this clan master as a symbolic leader and almost ignored his actual existence. However, it was this clan master who suddenly made the decision to move the capital without discussing with anyone or even communicating with the 7 aristocratic families. How could Ren Wei not be shocked? Yang Fan played with the jade lion paperweight in his hand and said calmly, "I said move the succession hall from Chang'an to Luoyang. Do it immediately." After saying that, Yang Fan raised his eyelids and glanced at Ren Wei. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, and he gave off a feeling of majesty without being angry. Ren Wei's heart skipped a beat. He quickly cupped his hands and replied in a deep voice, "Yes." Rin Wei turned around and left in a hurry. He could not help but say in his heart, 3 years of silence, one brilliant feat. Chapter 873. The order to move the capital shook the entire succession hall. Like 7 thick cobwebs, the 5 families and 7 clans that were tightly connected to the succession hall were also alarmed by this order. Lanzhou Longxi. South of Lanzhou City, an enormous and dignified mansion, richly ornamented beams and painted rafters, jade tiles and green eaves. From outside the high walls, one could only see layers upon layers of roof ridges in the shade of greenery, like undulating waves, countless. And on the lintel of this high wall and deep courtyard, there were 2 big words, Li Mansion. This was the center of the Li family in Longxi. In front of the shiny red lacquer gate, there were 2 huge stone pillars with densely packed characters. It was inscribed with the names of the outstanding figures that had emerged from the Li clan's dynasties and generations, as well as their accomplishments. Of these 2 stone pillars, the one on the left and the one on the right, the red lacquer gate in the middle was the door. This was where the name of the so-called aristocratic family came from. Here, the status of the Li family was no different from that of a noble. The mansion was rarely visited by people. Neither the military nor the people dared to wander around, just like the palace in Luoyang. But at this moment, there was a horse galloping over. It arrived at the corner door of the mansion and didn't stop for even a moment. In front of this huge mansion, the circumference of a small city, even the corner gate was twice the size of an ordinary house. A moment later, the news of Yang Fan's order to move the succession hall from Chang and to Luoyang was sent to old grandfather Li's desk. Ever since Yang Fan took over the succession hall, he has never forgotten the old rules. He has delegated the affairs of the succession hall to a few stewards in the hall. He seems to have the intention of ruling from the bottom of his heart. But now he suddenly decided to act arbitrarily, as if he was possessed by Lu Binmi. There must be a reason for this. Old grandfather Li stroked his beard and said, thoughtfully, Li Mingquan, the eldest grandson of the legal wife, who was reading beside him, said, "What do you think?" Yang Fan, who has always been indifferent to the affairs of the succession hall, and has always listened to the advice of the stewards in the hall, suddenly made such a decision without revealing anything beforehand. What is his intention? Great-grandfather Li shook his head and murmured, "It doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. There must be a reason behind this. He must have a purpose, but what is it?" Li Mingquan smiled and said, "I have thought of a possibility." "Oh." Great-grandfather Li looked at his grandson happily and encouraged him. "Tell me about it." Li Mingquan said, "I think that Yang Fan did this for Shenmu." Great-grandfather Li was startled at first, and then his expression changed slightly. "You mean he already knows that Shenmu is back?" Li Mingquan said, "Obviously. Otherwise, Yang Fan, who has always been indifferent to the affairs of the succession hall and has always been disdainful of power, would have no reason to do so." Li Taigong slowly stood up, clasped his hands behind his back, and paced back and forth in the room. Li Mingquan continued, "Shenmu was personally cultivated by you, great-grandfather. He has the closest relationship with our Li family, and we have always been on the same side. Now that Yang Fan wants to move the succession hall to Luoyang, it doesn't make sense based on his usual performance or Shenmu's reasons. The only reasonable explanation is that he wants to guard against Shenmu." Great-grandfather Li narrowed his eyes and listened to his grandfather's careful analysis. Li Mingquan saw that his grandfather was listening attentively and was greatly encouraged. He said, "If he wants to move the succession hall to Luoyang, it will have an adverse effect on Shenmu. By doing this, Yang Fan can turn passivity into initiative because he knows that Shenmu has sneaked back to Chang and has been there for as long as a year. Therefore, Shenmu must have already made arrangements in Chang, and he is not sure that he can defeat Shenmu. Moreover, he is an official and can't leave Luoyang even if he wants to, let alone Chang'an." Great-grandfather Li nodded slowly and said, "That makes sense. Continue." Li Mingquan said, "Secondly, he knows that Shenmu's biggest backer is you, great-grandfather. On the other hand, the succession hall is in Chang, and which is the closest to the territory of our Longxi Li family. Tai Gong can support Shenmu and move the succession hall out of Chang into him. This can reduce our influence on it." Great-grandfather Li glanced at him and said, "Is there a third reason?" Li Mingquan said, "Yes. The obvious sect and the hidden sect, one in the light and the other in the dark. Although there are conflicts, they are basically the left and right hands of our 7 sects and 5 families. Some things can't be separated, and these connections must be in the succession hall. Once the succession hall is moved to Luoyang, it will be under Yang Fan's nose, and he will be able to take the initiative." Great-grandfather Li's eyes twitched. He slowly raised his head and looked into the distance, muttering to himself, "Shenmu, what will he do?" Li Mingquan put down the scroll in his hand and slowly walked to his grandfather's side. He also looked into the distance, saying, "At least he can't stop this, and he has no reason to stop it." Although the succession hall has actually been split into the obvious sect and the hidden sect, it is still under the control of the obvious sect in name. Yang Fan is righteous and has a good reason to start. How can he stop it? The news that Yang Fan wanted to move the succession hall to Luoyang also reached the ears of great-grandfather Chui in Qinghe. The Chui family was an aristocratic family in the spring and autumn warring states period. They were originally important officials of the state of Qi, and then moved to the state of Lu. During the Qin and Han dynasties, they rose again in the Qinghe area and later divided into 2 branches, the Qinghe Chui family and the Boling Chui family. After moving south during the chaotic war, they gave birth to the Zhengzhou Chui, Yanling Chui, Qizhou Chui, and so on. They were all aristocratic families and were recognized as the world's most prestigious family, the leader of the noble families in the north. At this moment, great-grandfather Chui smiled like an old fox that had stolen a chicken. Although in the eyes of his descendants, the old ancestor smile was very benevolent, it was a pity that his words just happened to prove how treacherous his smile was. "This child, Yang Fan, has not disappointed me. This time, Shenmu is going to have a headache, and old man Li is also going to have a headache in Lanzhou, haha." Now, the person in charge of the daily affairs of the Chui family's Qinghe branch was his eldest son, Chui Yueshao, who was now around 50 years old. Chui Yueshao said in confusion, "Since father has the intention of nurturing Yang Fan, why did you wait until today to let him know of this?" Great-grandfather Chui said, "No matter how great the power of our aristocratic families is, we can only influence the court by guiding water into the canal and growing in secret. In the end, we can't compare to the court's thunderous methods. Don't underestimate Yang Fan. Although he rose to prominence late, his hidden power in the court is far inferior to Shenmu. If he had known of this earlier, with the help of the power in the court, Shenmu, who has already been greatly injured, may not be his match. Moreover, great-grandfather Chui said indifferently, if he didn't owe me this favor, I wouldn't have been able to make up my mind to help him so quickly, until he begged me to remove the Gu family's registration. I had originally planned to have Lin interact more with him and then leak this news to him through Lin. But I forgot that Gu was in the garden pruning at the time. In my opinion, it's still a bit too early to let him know." Chui Yueshao frowned, as if he didn't quite understand his father's words. After thinking carefully for a while, he relaxed his brows as if he had understood something. Great-grandfather Chui glanced at his son and said, "Do you understand? If you want to nurture someone, you don't have to let his family be the only one. Otherwise, he may not necessarily rely on you. The succession hall is a gateway for the 7 sects and 5 families, but isn't it also a battlefield for the power struggles between the 7 sects and 5 families? Everything must be planned for the long term." Chui Yueshao sighed softly. "Your son understands. Your son is only worried that the story of Chang and will repeat itself between Shenmu and Yongfan. Great-grandfather Chui said, "You don't have to worry about this. Lu Binmi is the eldest grandson of the Lu family. That's why he can mobilize so much power to start a war. Shinmu doesn't have this condition. Although the Longxi Li family supports him, they won't rashly mobilize the Li family's power to help him start a war." Yongfan was the same. His power in the succession hall is even weaker than Shinmu's. Only by borrowing his power in the imperial court can he be in a stalemate with Shinmu. This is the situation we hope for the most. With 7 families forming the succession hall, it doesn't matter which family is the leader. It should be as it is now. Shui Yueshao suddenly said, "Father is saying that since the obvious and hidden sects have already appeared, we can't let them merge again. That is like cultivating 2 parties in the court. If one party is the only one, the imperial power will also be threatened. Only when the 2 parties balance each other can we use them." Great-grandfather Chui nodded and said, "That's right. The obvious and hidden sects suffered great losses in the Battle of Chang'an. Even the major families were implicated. Today is an amendment to the situation that went out of control last time. The leader of the succession hall can't be a core disciple of any family. The 7 families have to work together to monitor them and balance the power between them." Great-grandfather Chui said, "Let them be like 2 parties in the imperial court. They have their own interests and also have common interests. When it comes to their own interests, they will fight openly and covertly. When it comes to common interests, they will unite against outsiders. This is the meaning of the imperial power. Above them, there is still us who make the rules, coordinate, and control the situation." Chui Yueshao said worriedly, "Father just said that Yongfan has a lot of hidden power in the imperial court. And the power of the imperial court doesn't play by our rules. Will the situation go out of control again?" Great-grandfather Chui thought for a moment and said, "Probably not. With the power of the imperial court, Yongfan can only barely fight to a draw with Shinmu. Moreover, the power of the imperial court isn't so easy to borrow. If he's not careful, he will fall into it. Yongfan is a smart man. He won't use a power he can't control too much and bring trouble to himself." Great-grandfather Chui yawned and said to his son, "I will take an afternoon nap. Send someone to send a message to Lin. If Yongfan's strength is insufficient, we must express our goodwill to him at the right time." "Yes." Chui Yueshao bowed and watched as his old father walked into his bedroom. As for the Fanyang Lu family, their reaction was much simpler and more violent when they heard the news. Great-grandfather Lu only laughed coldly when he heard the news. "Well fought. None of them are good people. Keep an eye on them. When the time is right, add fuel to the fire." Both of them were his grandson's greatest enemies. Unfortunately, as the head of the clan, great-grandfather Lu didn't dare to do anything to them and risk offending the other 6 families. But what if they fell? No matter who fell, they would become food in his stomach. Great-grandfather Lu's eyes shone with the ferocity of a wolf. Chapter 874. The news that Yongfan was moving the succession hall to Luoyang not only alarmed the 7 sects and 5 families, but it also alarmed his allies, especially the Digu and Shangguan families. Yongfan had been in charge of the succession hall for more than a year. Although he had always looked like he was ruling by himself and did not make too many adjustments or infiltration of the succession hall, he had used the convenience of controlling the succession hall to inject vitality into the dying Guanlong group and develop a force outside of Xianzong. Even though he did not do too much control over this power, since this power was born because of him, it naturally had to be controlled and influenced by him. The succession hall had been in Chang, and since its founding. Now that it was suddenly moving away, this was not as simple as moving away from a place. For an enormous organization like the succession hall that operated the economy and influenced politics, the significance was no less than a country moving its capital. It was always accompanied by deeper political intentions. The Digo family's roots were in Chang, and and they were the most uneasy about the succession hall moving out of Chang. And although the Shangguan family was also a part of the Guanlong group, because their family had always been involved in politics and now relied on Shanghai their focus had long since shifted to Luoyang. They could not contain their joy at Yang Fan's decision. The two families came to see him at the same time, wanting to find out what Yang Fan's intentions were. Yang Fan did not hide anything from the envoys sent by the two families. He received the envoys from the two families at the same time. The three had just sat down when Yang Fan said openly to them, "Shenmu has returned from Xinlua." The people from the two aristocratic families naturally knew who Shenmu was, and they also knew that Shenmu had been banished to Xinlua. However, as members of the Guanlong group, they did not know that Shenmu had already returned to the Central Plains. Therefore, Yang Fan's next sentence immediately caused their expressions to change. As early as a year ago, Shenmu had already secretly returned to the Central Plains. The two envoys were the core members of the Dugu and Shangguan families, and their intelligence was not something ordinary people could compare to. When Yang Fan said this, they immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. Shenmu's goal in doing this was naturally the Xian clan, and the master of the Xian clan was Yang Fan. The rise and fall of their families depended on Yang Fan. How could they not be nervous? I am in Luoyang and cannot help Chang'an. Moreover, he had secretly returned to Chang, and for a year. If he had any plans, he must have been well prepared. Now that I'm gone, the right time, the right place, and the right people are not in my hands. On the other hand, moving the successor hall to Luoyang will give me the advantage in terms of location and manpower. I might be able to make up for the loss of time. After Yang Fan set his goal, he said to the people from the Duga family, "Tell the head of the Duga family not to worry. I have no intention of giving up Chang'an. After the successor hall is moved to Luoyang, Chang'an will need your strength even more." Yang Fan then said to the people from the Shangguan family, "You have to play a big role in Luoyang. He is setting up a formation in Chang'an. Haha, I won't go. I want to force him to come to Luoyang to see me." The people from the Shangguan family stood up happily and said to Yang Fan, "The Shangguan family and General Yang will live or die together. We are willing to follow your orders and advance and retreat together." Although Yang Fan had provided a lot of convenience to the Shangguan family, and Shanghai Wanner had also used her influence to help many of her family members, Yang Fan and Wan were people who believed in keeping a low profile. Therefore, the two of them consciously suppressed the Shangguan family's involvement in politics, agriculture, and business. They did not want the Shangguan family to move too fast. This made the people from the Shangguan family very dissatisfied, but they could do nothing about it. This situation was an opportunity for them. The excitement brought by this opportunity made them temporarily forget about the heavy losses that could be brought if Yang Fan failed. The two of them quickly left with this important news. Floating fragrance lingers on the crooked shore. Round shadows cover the Hua, Qi always afraid that the autumn wind will come early, and you will not know it. The Hua Qi was gentle, and a boat floated on the oily silk-like water, gently gliding forward. A person on the boat was chanting. The crooked shore was bright and beautiful, and the pavilions and terraces were hidden among them. In the distance, there was the great Mercy Temple, the big wild goose pagoda, and many other sceneries. It was summer, and the lotus flowers were in full bloom. The shadows of the flowers were indistinct, and they could not be separated. Shenmu was wearing a loose robe, and his feet were bare. His hair was draped over his shoulders, and he was holding a cup in his hand. He looked like a wild and unrestrained scholar from the Han and Jin dynasties. It was a pity that the cup was not filled with wine but tea. "Enough! You don't even have an elementary scholar title, and you're pretending to be a scholar." Miss Chi-Chi, who was carrying a big belly, came out of the cabin with Gong Sun Lanji. She rebuked him mercilessly. Shenmu laughed dryly. "Talented people don't necessarily have an elementary scholar title. Don't you agree, Lanji?" Gong Sun Lanji supported Chi-Chi with one hand, and her other hand was placed on her small waist. There was a long sword at her waist. Stop talking nonsense. I'm not young anymore, and my parents ask me every day when I'm going to get married. When are you going to marry me? Shinmu's face changed. This year, Gongsun Lanji was overjoyed, really? Shinmu said, I'm afraid it's not possible this year. How about next year? Gongsun Lanji looked at him and asked, Are you sure? Shinmu said guiltily, I can't be sure about next year's matter now. If there are no accidents. As he spoke, he slid towards the back of the cabin like a yellow croaker. I'll definitely prepare as soon as possible. Definitely, definitely. You be *starred. While Gongsun Lanji was furious, Shinmu had already hugged his head and ran to the back of the ship. Yang Shuirao sat at the back of the ship, wearing a bamboo hat and holding a fishing rod in her hand. Shinmu came over quietly, and Yang Shuirao only knew that he was here when she saw his reflection in the water. Yang Shuirao glanced at him and said, You've been hiding for the past year, and now that he knows your whereabouts, you can show yourself openly. Why are you still sneaking around? Shinmu sat down beside her and laughed bitterly. Maybe I'm used to hiding. Yang Shuirao frowned and said, Is it really okay to be like this? I still feel that you're not being honest and upright. No wonder he's using underhanded means to deal with you. I don't have any other way. Shinmu frowned, and his originally cheeky face became serious. What can I do? Should I go directly to him and have a heart-to-heart talk? It's fine if he agrees, but what if he doesn't? I'll have lost the initiative then. What can I use to fight against him? Can I place my future and the future of all my brothers on his trust? How much suffering have I suffered, and how lowly I was, to walk step by step to where I am today and become a person above others. You know it better than anyone else. Which step of mine didn't I kill my way out of mutual deception? Among them, there are those who trusted me, nurtured me, and treated me as a nephew or a brother. In the end, when my status and power exceeded theirs, everything changed. Some of those who once nurtured me were filled with jealousy and thought of ways to trample me down. Those who once treated me as a brother betrayed me and stabbed me in the back. Yang Fan might not be such a person, but I can't make decisions based on my own judgment. Judgment can be wrong, but strength can't. But no buts, because I don't represent myself. To this day, do you think I can compromise just because I want to? Once, our goal was to be on equal footing with the obvious sect. After Lu Binmi died, many of the hidden sect's brothers began to hope to be above the obvious sect. What will be the status of the obvious sect and hidden sect in the future? Who will be on equal footing? This is not something that can be discussed, but fought. Then can you win? No matter what, Shinmu was her man, and what she cared about was Shenmu's success or failure. Shinmu stared at the fishing bobber on the clear water. The bobber was floating up and down, and there was already a fish on the hook. However, Yang Shuirao was too concerned and only stared at him with concern and didn't notice. Shenmu slowly said, The 7 sects and 5 families might be huge, but what they can do to the world and to the imperial court is to use their enormous economic power to push the imperial court to make decisions that are beneficial to them. This process is extremely slow. If it's fast, it will take 1 or 2 years. If it's slow, it will take 10 or 100 years. Thus, the aristocratic families need people in the imperial court. They use all methods to send their descendants into the imperial court to become officials, or they don't hesitate to spend money to nurture some officials with a bright future. When they become officials, they will return the favor. With their support in the imperial court, the policy decisions that are beneficial to the aristocratic families can be passed in a short few months or a few years. It is the same the other way around. If you want to attack the aristocratic families but can't use military means, then the best method is to reduce the number of aristocratic families' descendants and people who have close relationships with the aristocratic families becoming officials. Emperor Yang of Sui created the imperial examination system for this purpose. The current dynasty's Emperor Gaozu, Taizong, Gaozong, and even the current emperor continued this system for this purpose. Emperor Taizong rewrote the clan genealogy and the current emperor promoted the commoner scholars for this purpose. This is the most effective method and also the fastest method. I think that Yang Fan is in the imperial court and has a complicated relationship with many factions. He will most likely use the same method. He must be an idiot if he doesn't use what he is good at. The bobber no longer swayed, and the fish had left the hook. Yang Xiurao, who didn't notice anything, nervously said to Shinmu, "The hidden sect has only risen for a short period of time, and the nurturing of officials will take years, decades, or even decades. In this aspect, your foundation is far inferior to the hidden sect. In addition, you were suppressed by young Master Jiang in the past. After defeating him with great difficulty, you were exiled to Xinlua by the biased clan lords. After coming back for a year, you were busy recovering your vitality and filling up the holes left by the fierce battle with young Master Jiang. Your influence in the imperial court hasn't developed much. If he starts to attack in this aspect, I'm afraid you will be at a disadvantage." Shinmu stretched his waist and recovered his usual lazy smile. He said indifferently, "What can I do? I have prepared for a year in advance and have already gained a great advantage. I can't possibly ask this little brother to tie up his hands and feet and fight with me, right? Don't worry, I have already set up a chess piece, and I hope it will be effective." Yang Xiurao asked curiously, "What chess piece did you set up?" Shinmu laughed heartily and said, "You don't have to ask about these things. You should be more concerned about when you are going to give birth to a son for me. Look at Chi-Chi. She hasn't even married to me, and her belly is already growing." When Shanmu mentioned this, Yang Xiurao instantly had a belly full of hidden bitterness. "Isn't it because you didn't live up to expectations? Why do you think I ran to the back to fish by myself? Humph! I can't be bothered to see her showing off." Shanmu complained, "How can you blame me for not living up to expectations? I have irrigated your fertile field, right? What can I do if you don't give birth to me? This is really strange. People always say that a big butt is good for reproduction. You gave birth to a big but for nothing." Before he finished speaking, there was a splash sound, and a mournful scream quickly echoed from the surface of the river Chu. "Save me! I can't swim." Gudong Dong. Chapter 875. That night, the Zhang brothers came up with an ingenious idea. They ordered people to use colored silk to cut green leaves and red flowers and bamboo threads to make huge lotus flowers on top of the flowing water outside the Hall of Flying Fragrance. When everything was ready, the Zhang brothers and a group of beautiful youths from Fengqin Hall invited Wu Zetian to admire the flowers by the pond. The flowing water in the curved pond was illuminated by lanterns everywhere. The starlight and lamplight were one and reflected in the water, rippling endlessly. Although it was summer, the evening was still refreshing. This scene was like heaven on earth, making Wu Zetian very happy. Immediately, the group of beautiful youths from Fengqin Hall disappeared without a trace. After a while, the sound of music started. In the melodious and elegant music, the huge lotus flowers bloomed, and in each lotus flower, there was a young man in colorful clothes dancing to the music. The one who appeared in the largest and most beautiful lotus flower in the middle was Zhang Changzong, who was known as Lianhua Lulang. Wu Zetian applauded for their ingenuity. After enjoying the song and dance, Wu Zetian made an exception and drank a few more cups of wine. Taking advantage of the wine, she looked at the beautiful and charming Zhang brothers with her drunken eyes and said, "I am a little tired. The rest of you can leave. Wulong, Lulang, help me back to my bedroom." Zhang Changzong and his brother happily stepped forward and helped Wu Zetian back to her bedroom. The other beautiful youths of Fengqin Hall knew that it was difficult to win against the two of them and returned to their residences with peace of mind. Wu Zetian said with a smile, "Every day, it is only the two of you who try your best to make me happy. It is really hard on you to actually come up with such an idea." Zhang Yiji said obediently, "I am unable to share your Majesty's worries in the affairs of the country. Serving your majesty well and making your majesty happy every day is considered to have done my part." Wu Zetian smiled and glanced at him, saying, "I knew that today's show was also your idea. Lu Lang is honest and not as scheming as you. Lu Lang has taken so much trouble. You must have something to ask of me." "He, say it. What do you want from me?" Zhang Yiji hurriedly let go of Wu Zetian and took 2 steps back before turning around and kneeling down. He said with heartfelt admiration, "Your Majesty is wise and farsighted. Your subjects' thoughts were indeed unable to hide from your Majesty's discerning eyes. I do have something to ask of your Majesty. It is neither an official position nor a reward. But I hope your Majesty can dismiss your attendance because it involves a great deal of privacy, and I am ashamed to say it in public." Wu Zetian's curiosity was piqued. She quickly waved her hand and ordered the palace eunuchs and guards to leave. She asked, "What's the matter?" Only then did Zhang Yiji tell Wu Zetian everything in detail. Hearing this, Wu Zetian frowned. Zhang Yiji to Wu Zetian. Zhang Yiji then. Besides, Zhang Yiji's mother was already a middle-aged woman, and Li Chongxiu was a high-ranking official of the imperial court with wives and concubines. How could they be matchmakers? Breaking up a husband and a wife and forcing a mother to marry would damage her reputation. This was different from her daughter's marriage. It was to reconcile the conflict between the Wu and Li families and to win the hearts of the people. But now, just to fulfill Zhang Yiji's filial piety, she forced a minister to divorce his wife and marry someone else. Wu Zetian thought unhappily, "This Mrs. Zhang is too much. If you like that Li Chongxiu, you can have a secret relationship with him. Why must you marry him openly?" Zhang Yiji saw her frowning and did not say anything. He quickly kowtowed and said, "Yiji also knows that this matter is unreasonable, but seeing mother's concern, I cannot bear it. Looking at the whole world, only your Majesty's golden mouth and jade words can help. During the previous review, I am indebted to your Majesty for the promotion. I am willing to resign. I only ask your Majesty to fulfill my wish." Zhang Changzong also quickly knelt down to help, saying, "Your Majesty, Wulong is filial to his mother. I beg your Majesty to show mercy." Wu Zetian was silent for a long time. She sighed softly and said, "Forget it. There is no morning court tomorrow. I will issue an imperial decree to summon Li Chongxiu and her mother to the palace. I will have a chat with them first. Wulong, go back tomorrow and bring your mother here. Let them get to know each other first. I will act according to the circumstances." Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong, 2 brothers, saw that she finally agreed. They were overjoyed and repeatedly kowtowed to thank her. The house that Wu Sansi built next to Dingding Street happened to be in the hot rental area. When the rich merchants and high-ranking officials returned to the capital, they all liked to rent this house. Not only the house was grand, because it belonged to the Liangwang family, it could directly face the street and open the door, making it convenient to enter and exit. In the past, when Tin Ano used his identity as a Dunhuang merchant to deceive Lu Junfan, he also rented this house. If Lu Junfan did not see that she rented such a luxurious house with so many servants, she would not have been so easily fooled. Now, this house had just been used and returned by the previous guest, and it was immediately rented again. The people who rented this house were a few Sichuan merchants. During the Tang Dynasty, if one were to talk about economic development in the north, the area south of the Yangtze River had not yet become a land of fish and rice. The population was sparse and agriculture was backward. Politics, economy, culture, and technology were all far behind the north. The north was an agricultural area, but when it came to commerce, Guangzhou and Bashu were the most prosperous. The Sichuan merchants had already become strong as early as the Qin and Han dynasties. They opened up the 1,000-mile plank road, the tea-horse road, the shoe-cloth road, and the silk road in the south. For example, the widow Ah Qing of Bashu once helped Emperor Qin build the Great Wall and later provided a large amount of mercury for Emperor Qin's mausoleum. Emperor Qin even specially built the Huiqing platform for her to commemorate her. Another example was Prince Zhuo's iron ruler Lin Qiong. Today, Bashu was still the most prosperous in commerce. Luoyang and Guangzhou took advantage of the imperial capital and had more Hu merchants. The emergence and prosperity of Jin merchants, Hui merchants, and other large merchant groups was after the Song and Ming dynasties. At this time, the south only had Yangzhou and Quanzhou, which could be considered more developed in commerce. There were more than 10 of these Sichuan merchants. They dealt in salt, cloth, medicine, grain, and so on. Among them, there were 2 leaders. One was called Songbati, the other Long Jiutao. The 2 of them were sleeping on the same bed. The bed was covered with a glossy, jade-like top-quality mat. The 2 of them waved their palm leaf fans and listened to the crickets, whispering outside. Songbati asked in a thick Sichuan accent, "What did that Zhang Tongxiu say?" Long Jiutao snorted and said, "First, we gave him a generous gift, and then promised him great benefits." What else could he say? Naturally, he was blinded by money and agreed to arrange for us to meet with second Zhang as soon as possible. Songbati softly grunted, "Look at the long term. Don't be stingy with money. Only by spending money can you earn more money. No one is willing to go against money. If 500 strings of coins is not enough, then 1,000 strings of coins. If 1,000 strings of coins is not enough, then 5,000 strings of coins." Long Jiutao said, "There's no need to explain this. I don't care about the money spent. I just feel that Shenmu is making a big fuss over a minor issue. It's just a mere young fan who relied on good luck to climb up step by step. There's no need to be so cautious. This kind of person, won't he be reduced to ashes with just a little trick?" Songbati chuckled twice and said, "Good luck? Once or twice you can say it's good luck. Who can rely on good luck all the time? Xue Huai has more than 1,000 disciples, and he has dozens of disciples close to him. Why didn't others stand out? He used his wits to repel the Turkic army of 100,000. If it were you, would you be able to do it?" In his life, that Tubo god Luin Trinling defeated Xue, Ringui, Li Jingxian, Lu Xinli, Wang Xiaojie, Lu Shirda, and many other famous generals. He only suffered a small loss at the hands of Blacktooth Changji. If not for the fact that both countries were exhausted from fighting and made peace, it would have been hard to say who would have won and who would have lost if the war had continued. It was this invincible and powerful general who had fallen to Yang Fan's schemes. The ruthless officials of the imperial censorate moved unhindered throughout the court. How many princes and marquises of Xiang had fallen under their hands? Who was it that incited the southern frontier to exert external pressure and instigate the ministers to bring them to justice one by one? The Khitans rebelled in the north and wanted to ally with the Turks. If it were anyone else, would they be able to easily dissolve the enemy's alliance, turn the tide, and hasten the Khitan's swift defeat? Old Ninth, if you attribute all the great things he has done to his luck and look down on his ability, you will certainly suffer a great loss at his hands. Not to mention anything else. Just that proud act of his that allowed him to ascend to the position of the prominent sect patriarch. If you were the assistant minister of the heavenly official, would you be able to think of a way to advance by retreating? Long Jiutao was silent for a moment before he said, "If he is truly a person of great wisdom, it does not seem to be a good idea to be enemies with him." Songbati sighed and said, "Shenmu is also in a difficult position. The human heart is not content and wants more than what they have. If we don't compete and determine who is superior, many of the leaders in the hidden sect will not be convinced. They will think that Shenmu is giving up the authority and status that our hidden sect can easily obtain. Then, Shenmu's position will not be stable." Long Jiutao said, "And, not to mention others, I will not be convinced either. Even if this person is incredible, I do not think that he has the ability to deal with us. Then let us compete with him. If he wants to win the status and authority that he deserves, then he will have to show us his abilities." Songbati said, That is why we have to win over Second Zhang. The Wu clan is currently led by Wu Sanxi, and we do not know how deep the relationship between Wu Sanxi and Yang Fan is. If we hastily make contact, we will inadvertently alert the enemy. Furthermore, in the current imperial court, the emperor's most favored person is Second Zhang. As long as we can win them over, we will be able to resist Yang Fan's advantage in the officialdom. Long Jutao slapped his thigh and said, "Good. I will invite Zhang Tongxiu to a banquet tomorrow. We must get in touch with Second Zhang as soon as possible." This summer was very hot, and the battle between the prominent sect and hidden sect was also in full swing. It was like a battle between two armies. On the surface, it looked like there was no substantial contact between the two sides. Right now, they were only at the stage of mobilizing troops, preparing rations, scouting the enemy's situation, and formulating a plan of action. The final victory was largely determined by these preparations before the official battle. Under Yang Fan's unyielding orders, the succession hall finally moved into Luoyang. With their massive influence, it was very easy for them to settle down. They used various identities to conceal themselves among the millions of people in Luoyang. As long as the 7 sects and 5 families had not made up their minds to abandon Yang Fan, they would not interfere in this matter. While the people of the prominent sect who had lived in Chang and for a long time were dissatisfied with moving into Luoyang, they were just dissatisfied. The sect master had already made up his mind. They also knew that the success or failure of this battle would determine their authority and status in the future, so they did their best to start preparing according to Yang Fan's orders. The hidden sect had originally been a part of the prominent sect. It was the battle in Chang, and that had completely established the hidden sect status in the pugilistic world as equals with the prominent sect. What about the battle in Luoyang? Chapter 876. These days, Yang Fan was very busy. He managed the daily affairs of the military camp, inspected the situation of the garrison in the palace, went to the secret stronghold of the succession hall, sat and discussed with the old men of the Tianming Pavilion, met with the Shangguan family and other factions in the capital, and kept in touch with the Zhang brothers and Wu Sanxi. Speaking of which, during this period of time he was even busier than when he first formed the 1,000 cavalry. It was just that most of the time he could return to the mansion to rest. But even if he returned to the mansion, he still had to deal with matters one after another. He often had to wait until the moon was high above the willow tree before he could extinguish the candle and return to Xiaoman or Anu to rest. It was already very late today, but Yang Fan was still in the study. There was a lamp on the table covered with a white gauze, and on the cover was a green plum tree, looking very simple and elegant. There was a beauty under the lamp, charming like the shadow of a flower. Sitting opposite Yang Fan was Gu Zhuting. These days she no longer had any tasks, but only accompanied Xiaoman and Anu in the backyard. Therefore her clothes and clothing also changed according to Anu. She was wearing a lake silk shirt, moon white, lightly embroidered, with fine workmanship and exquisite materials. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but it was difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Miss Gu had never worn clothes made of such expensive materials before. When she had first put on the soft, close-fitting and comfortable clothes made of lake silk, she had felt somewhat uncomfortable. But now, if she were to change back into her coarse clothes, her delicate skin would probably feel uncomfortable. It was unknown whether it was because she had nothing to do all day in the backyard, so she had the time and mood to draw her eyebrows and lips, or because she deliberately dressed up before coming to see Yang Fan tonight. Sitting under the lamp, Gu Zhuting looked especially charming. Her summer clothes were thin, soft, and close-fitting, which made the lines of her body gentle and smooth. Her fair skin was like a freshly peeled perfume pear, and her glossy black hair was tied up in a bun with a green hairpin, showing a unique charm. That day Gu Zhang misunderstood the relationship between Yang Fan and his daughter. When Gu Zhuting understood what her father was thinking, she was ashamed and angry at the same time. However, her thoughts were originally like a seed buried in fertile soil. It was originally deeply buried, and everyone knew what was on her mind, now that her father had revealed it to her, especially when her parents not only did not object to it, but also seemed to be happy to see it happen. This was like the warm spring flowers blooming, the frozen soil thawing, and fresh air seeping in, allowing that seed to quietly germinate. At first, it was just an occasional fantasy, but now it was more and more difficult to get rid of. Especially since Anu was pregnant, Yang Fan often came over to stay and take care of his wife. Gu Zhuting could often see the two of them happily under the moonlight. She felt even more envious of them. Tonight, Yang Fan had summoned her to see him. Gu Zhuting knew that it was impossible for it to be a personal matter, but her heart was still beating wildly. Love was an inevitable part of life for both men and women. The longer one suppressed it, the harder it would be to suppress it once it was triggered. Yang Fan looked at her. Perhaps it was because of the hot summer night, but her tender cheeks were flushed red, looking very beautiful. It was impossible to tell that she used to be a female assassin who could take someone's life at any time. Yang Fan hesitated for a moment before saying, "I heard from Gu Zhang that the former Qianzhou Governor Xie, you killed King Chao in order to curry favor with His Majesty. Fearing revenge, he stayed in a tall building at night, with layers of guards outside and a giant bed inside, surrounded by dozens of concubines to prevent assassins. King Chao's heir spent a lot of money to hire you to go up the tall building at night and take his head. It was only when the sky was bright that the people inside and outside discovered his head was missing." Gu Zhuting was slightly surprised, not knowing why he brought this up. She said, "Yes, that was 14 years ago. At that time, I had just been transferred to the succession hall to work. In order to save money, the sect master accepted a large sum of money from King Chao's heir and ordered me to assassinate Xieyu. At that time, I was not the only one who went with me. It was just that I was weak, so the others stayed outside and I went in to carry out the task." Yang Fan clapped his hands and said, "You are only 13 years old and can accomplish such a big task. You are really amazing." Being praised, Gu Zhuting blushed even more. She gently lowered her head and said, "Why did Ah Lang mention this?" Yang Fan sighed and said, "To tell you the truth, I have a big task that requires a few people to handle first. I wanted to let your brothers go, but your father said that in terms of stealth skills, your brothers are not as good as you. In fact, letting your brothers go should be enough to complete this task. It is just that this matter is of great importance. If there is a first-class expert like you, then it will be foolproof. So, I am afraid I will have to make a slip of the tongue." Gu Zhuting was startled and said in surprise, "A slip of the tongue?" Yang Fan said, "Yes. I originally said that as long as you guard the rear residence, you will not show your face in public." Gu Zhuting suddenly understood and said, "Since the situation requires it, I am willing to serve Ah Lang. I will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation." Yang Fan quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, "It is not that serious. I am letting you go this time, not to kill people. The bureaucracy has its own rules, and it is not something that can be solved by killing people. If you want to kill people, it must be done within the rules of the bureaucracy. You must know that killing is not the goal, winning is the goal." Gu Zhuting said, "Yes, I will follow Ah Lang's instructions." Yang Fan said, "Good. Then I will leave this matter to you, and your brothers will assist from the side." Yang Fan explained the matter to Gu Zhuting. Gu Zhuting thought for a moment and said worriedly, "If Ah Lang uses this method, will it infuriate Shinmu? Once it becomes a situation where they will not rest until one party is dead, this servant is worried." Yang Fan laughed and said, "Back then when I went against young Master Zhang, Anu was worried that I would not be able to withstand a single blow. Now that the obvious sect is in my hands, you are worried that I will not be able to withstand a single blow when I go against Shinmu. Is the obvious sect stronger or the hidden sect stronger? Or do you think I am too stupid?" Gu Zhuting sighed softly in her heart and said, I am just worried about your success or failure. I am just too concerned about it. However, she said, this servant does not have the intention to belittle Ah Lang. It is just that this will infuriate Shinmu, and it will not be easy to reconcile. Ah Lang must be prepared. Yang Fan said, I understand, but you have to be clear that this is a war that involves all aspects of the bureaucracy and the business world. Be it the bureaucracy or the business world, they are all places that are constantly changing and unpredictable. If you are not careful, you will be eliminated. Without extraordinary courage, without the courage to fight back from the brink of death, and without vigilance and decisive methods, you will definitely be defeated. You must be bold, meticulous, soft on the outside and hard on the inside. You must not show weakness blindly. When it is time to be bold for once. That is courage, and you can seize the initiative. Now that the hidden sect is greedy and ambitious, I have to let them know my capabilities and feel my toughness and determination. Only then will they sit down and have a good talk with me. It all depends on one's heart. Gu Zhuting tilted her head and thought for a moment. When the light shone on her face, she looked very beautiful. After thinking for a moment, Gu Zhuting pursed her lips and smiled. Yes, this servant will obey Ah Lang's instructions. Yang Fan asked curiously, What are you laughing at? Gu Zhuting's eyes flickered and said, This servant is thinking about the matter of Ah Lang escorting the prince of Luling back to the capital. Ah Lang is courageous, resourceful, and has hundreds of schemes. He has fooled all the assassins and killers. With such a clever scheme, he will naturally be able to deal with the current situation. This servant is worrying for nothing. Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh when he heard it. He didn't know that Gu Zhuting laughed because she realized that he was explaining to her in a very serious manner. In fact, she was just a subordinate of Yang Fan. She just had to do whatever he wanted her to do. Why was there a need for her to understand? She felt that Ah Lang's patient explanation didn't seem to be completely treating her as a subordinate. Thus she was delighted. Ah Lang, when do I set off? Tomorrow morning. Good. Then this servant will go back to prepare. Ah Lang, these days have been too hard. Take care of yourself. After saying these words that shouldn't be said by a subordinate, but had already revealed a little of her affection, Gu Zhuting slipped out like a rabbit being watched by an eagle. Yang Fan looked at her fleeing appearance and sighed softly. Only an idiot wouldn't be able to notice Miss Gu's growing affection for him. But he was already very satisfied with his beautiful wives and concubines at home. He really had no intention of expanding his harem. As a result, in the face of Miss Gu's increasingly obvious willingness, he had a feeling that there is a true meaning in this. But I want to argue, but forget to say it. That night, Yang Fan slept in Xiao Man's room. The two mischievous children, a son and a daughter, were sent to the wet nurse in advance. By now, the little ones had already gotten used to the rule that when their father wanted to sleep in their mother's room, they had to abdicate. After half a night of wind and rain, Yang Fan got up at dawn. He pushed open the window and saw that the world was as clear as jade. As soon as he opened the window, a fresh and cool air hit his face. The green leaves and red flowers under the window were wet and fresh. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, Did it rain last night? Xiao Man pulled the thin quilt to cover her snow-white breasts and said lazily, You slept like a dead pig. The thunder was so loud in the middle of the night. Didn't you hear it? Yang Fan laughed and said, I really didn't hear it. Was there thunder last night? Xiao Man coquettishly rolled her eyes at him. She turned over and threw her smooth jade back to him and said, Close the window, I still want to sleep for a while. Yes. Yang Fan looked up at the sky and said, It's gloomy. I'm afraid it will rain again in a while. It's cool and refreshing, but I'm afraid the road will be difficult to travel. Hearing this, Xiao Man turned around and said, Why? Are you going back to the barracks today? Yang Fan said, I won't go back to the barracks. I'm going to the Ministry of Justice. I asked Dr. Chun for a favor, so I'll go to his place and have a chat. After that, I'll go to the palace, and then I'll be back. You continue to sleep. Yang Fan closed the window, dressed neatly, and walked out. Xiao Men usually had to wake up early to practice, but today was a rainy day. She was also tortured by her Langjun last night, so she was really too lazy to get up. She yawned and wanted to sleep for a while. Just as she was about to wake up, she heard her son's loud voice shouting from outside. "Father!" "It's raining. The water is overflowing the pond. The toads are jumping onto the shore. Father, take me to catch the toads." Yang Fan's voice said, "Oh, my baby, Father still has things to do. I can't catch the toads with you. Go find your mother. Your mother is the best at catching toads. She can catch them accurately." "Mother!" Yang Yanzu immediately roared with confidence. "This bad guy, he really doesn't want me to sleep." Xiao Man sat up in a panic, grabbed her clothes, and put them on. As she put them on, she shouted, I'm coming. Mother will be here soon. Don't come in. Go find a jar, we'll put the toads in." Chapter 877. By the time Yang Fan came out of the Ministry of Justice, it was drizzling again. Ran Wei handed him his straw raincoat and led his horse. Yang Fan adjusted the saddle and stirrups, sat down, and cupped his hands to Qindong. Qindong returned the greeting with a smile and watched Yang Fan ride his horse into the distance. Only then did he turn around, lift the lapel of his robe, and step over the door-sill with ease. His attendant held an oil paper umbrella for him and followed him step by step into the curtain of rain. Outside the boundaries of the palace, it was no longer a smooth bluestone road. It had rained heavily last night, and in the early morning, all kinds of pedestrians, carriages, and horses had made the originally smooth street into ravines, crisscrossing and very muddy. Especially on the side of the Tianjin Bridge, the civil officials' ox carts, carriages, and the military officials' horses had trampled the ground into a puddle of mud. Yang Fan slowed down his horse. When he stepped on the muddy ground to the bridgehead, his horse's hooves, which were as big as the mouth of a bull, were covered in yellow mud. Following the clattering of the hooves, yellow mud fell from the horse's hooves, and the entire bridgehead was also dirty. The drizzle continued, but the number of pedestrians on the street did not decrease. Ding Ding Street was the most prosperous and important street in Luoyang. Unless there was a hailstorm, there would not be a moment of peace here. Yang Fan crossed the Tianjin Bridge and went down along the long street, passing by the Good Selection Square. Just as he was about to reach the Good Selection Square where he lived, there was a sudden commotion on the street, and there was a faint sound of cursing. Yang Fan stopped when he heard the sound and reined in his horse to take a look. He saw a fair-skinned, handsome young man hurriedly escaping from the square. This person's clothes were disheveled, and his hair was disheveled. His feet were trudging through the mud, and when he looked closely, he saw that he was barefooted. He was obviously dressed like a scholar, but he did not know what had happened to make him look so miserable. While Yang Fan was slightly surprised, another group of people chased after him. Among them was a young woman in emerald green robes. Her hair accessories and clothes were all in the style of a married woman. She looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. She was pretty, but the tip of her eyebrows was raised, faintly giving off a fierce aura. This long street had been soaked by the rain and was extremely muddy. Although there were many people on the street, there were very few women. This young woman with a head full of pearls and emeralds, dressed in luxurious clothes, did not care. In order to catch up with the young man who was running for his life in front of her, she lifted the hem of her dress with one hand and spread her legs wide open, causing the yellow mud to splatter everywhere. Seeing that the young man in front of her had escaped onto the main street, making it even more difficult to chase after him, the pretty young woman hurled with all her might in a moment of desperation. A black object flew into the air, smashing towards Yang Fan. Yang Fan stood his horse motionlessly, allowing Wei to drive his horse forward a step. The sheathed long saber slapped towards the hidden weapon. With a plop sound, it fell to the ground. It was a wooden clog. Ran Wei looked at the clog and then at his own mud-covered scabbard. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As for the beautiful young woman, she was barefooted and caught up to the young man in just a few strides. She threw him down on the muddy ground like a tiger, swung her arms, and slapped him on both sides. Crack, 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 sounds rang out. Being ridden by the young woman, the young man was in dire straits and was unexpectedly unable to resist. After suffering several slaps in a row, he couldn't help but cry out, "I am your husband. How dare you treat me like this?" Riding on him, the young woman continued to wave her fan and claw as she loudly cursed. "My father will soon become the crown prince, and I will be the current princess. How dare you bully me like this?" Hearing these words, Yang Fan was inwardly alarmed. When he looked again, it just so happened that the pretty young woman was fiercely slapping him, causing some mud to splatter on her face. She used the back of her palm to wipe it off, leaving behind several traces of mud. Not only did this not obscure her beauty, it instead added a bit of mischievousness. Seeing that she looked familiar, Yang Fan thought to himself, "I've seen her before. Which daughter of the Prince of Luling is this? Ah, that's right, this is Yi Junju." Yi and Junju Li Xinyu had been chasing and beating, panting for breath. She was also somewhat tired. Seeing that the people of the residence had already caught up, she shouted, "A bunch of trash! Come here and tie him up for me." Since Yi Junju had obtained the title of Junju, she had a residence, guards of honor, and a salary. She also had a group of subordinates of the Junju Fu, such as the judges of the hall, attendants, eunuchs, palace maids, and so on. However, they were limited by the level of regulation and did not have anything like a chief clerk. At this time, she had already been married to Pei Sun for nearly 2 months and lived in her own Junju Fu. Other than her husband, everyone else in the Fu was part of her dowry, so these people naturally only listened to her orders. Immediately, 2 strong servants came over, untied their belts, and tied Pei Sun up tightly. Yi and Junju pointed at Pei Sun, unable to restrain her anger, and said, "You are so despicable. It has not even been 2 months since you were married to this Junju, and you already have an outside pet, treating me like I'm nothing. If I don't teach you a good lesson today, you won't know how powerful I am." Pei Sun refused to accept this and loudly retorted, "That woman was originally my maid, and we had intimate relations long ago. It was only because I married you that I sent her away and arranged for her to be placed in another residence. She is not an outside pet that I kept after I married you." Yi and Junju Li Xinyu gave him another heavy slap on the face, scolding, "You still dare to rebut me? Since you are my husband, you still have an unclear relationship with her. Do you think you are in the right?" After Yi and Junju finished speaking, she turned her head and shouted, "You are all a bunch of useless servants. Have the executioners not caught up yet?" Pei Sun was shocked and struggled, saying, "Execute? Execute what? What do you want to do to Qingya?" Qing, you must be the name of his outside pet. Today, when he was visiting a friend, he had gone to be affectionate with that outside pet. He did not know how Yi and Junju had received the news and actually led people to attack. Pei Sun had fled in a panic, not knowing that Yi and Junju was going to harm that woman. Hearing this, Yi and Junju only smiled coldly and said nothing. After a while, for eunuchs dressed in the robes of eunuchs hurried over and bowed to Yi and Junju. Yi and Junju said harshly, "Have you punished that lowly servant?" One of the eunuchs bowed and answered, "As Junju has ordered, we have already cut off that woman's nose and tongue. Please, Junju, examine them." As he spoke, he took out a cloth bag from his sleeve and opened it. There were 2 bloody things inside. Pei Sun gave a loud cry, and tears streamed down his face. He glared angrily at Yi and Junju and said through gritted teeth, "You vicious woman, extremely jealous and cruel. You are not worthy of being a descendant of the emperor." And Junju smiled coldly and said, "Do you still want to slander the monarch's father? Do you want your entire family to suffer as well?" Pei Sun's heart shook and he gritted his teeth. However, he did not dare to curse anymore. And Junju snorted coldly and raised her chin. She said proudly, "Don't think that I don't dare to punish you just because you are my husband. I am only giving you a small punishment today. In the future, if I find that you have wronged me in any way, I will castrate you." And Junju slapped the bloody tongue and nose from the eunuch's hand and said, "Go, cut off his hair." When the eunuch heard this, he was shocked. He could punish a woman who had no one to rely on and no power, but the person in front of him was the husband of a Junju after all. How could he humiliate him like this? Also, the Pei family was a large and powerful family. The Pei family did not dare to do anything to and Junju, but if he really dared to follow the Junju's orders, it would be easy for the Pei family to punish a servant like him. The eunuchs and eunuchs did not dare to act, and the subordinates all came forward to persuade him. And Junju saw that they did not dare to act, so she pulled out a knife from the waist of an imperial guard and personally walked forward. She untied Pei Sun's hair and grabbed his hair. As she cut off his hair, she said, "Today this Junju will use my hair as a token to teach you a small lesson. If you dare to mistreat me in the future, I will not forgive you." Pei Sun's hands were held behind his back, and two servants with great strength held him down. He could not struggle and could only allow Li Xinyu to cut his hair. The people on the street watched in the rain. They all looked at this pitiful person who had the misfortune of marrying the daughter of the imperial family with sympathetic gazes. Pei Sun raised his head to the sky and lamented. He wailed, "What sin did I, Pei Sun, commit in my previous life to marry such a barbaric and rude woman?" Yang Fan saw that this Junju was making an outrageous ruckus, especially when she implicated the innocent and ordered people to cut off the nose and tongue of Pei Sun's favorite. This action caused Yang Fan to feel even more disgust. He made a hand signal to Renwei. Seeing this, Renwei immediately urged his horse forward and shouted, "Stop!" And Junju was burning with jealousy. She did not care who shouted for her to stop and continued to cut off his hair. Seeing this, Renwei could only float down from his horse and go forward to stop her. He said, "Junju, please stop." Li Xinyu had grown up in the mountains since she was young. Ever since she knew that her father was going to become the crown prince and she was going to become the princess of the dynasty, the attitude of a nouveau riche caused her to become so arrogant that she forgot herself. At this moment, the only person she was afraid of was the Wu family. Seeing that this person dared to go forward to stop her, she did not know the other's background. She stopped and asked, "Who are you?" At this moment, Pei Sun's hair had been cut into long and short strands, as if it had been chewed on by a dog. It was unknown how much he had suffered, but at this moment he only raised his head to look at the sky, allowing the fine rain to fall on his face. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he did not move at all. Renwei said, "This subject is Renwei. I am only a minor officer under the command of the investigating misconduct disposal envoy. Junju, using your wife to bully your husband, and this is on the streets, it is truly an affront to public morals. Even this subject cannot continue watching this. Please calm down, Junju. Since this is a family matter, even if there is something wrong with your husband, you can report it to your in-laws and make the decision." When Junju heard that this person's surname was not Wu and that he was some investigating misconduct disposal envoy that she had never heard of before, she could not help but laugh coldly and say, "Since when can a cat or a dog run over to meddle in the private affairs of the imperial family? Get lost." Yang Fan raised his horse and went forward. He said indifferently, "This official is the current emperor's sentinel, not some cat or dog. If there is anything in Luoyang that violates the law, this official can investigate it." Li Xinyu raised her head to look and saw that the person sitting on the horse was wearing a woven rush raincoat. She could not see the color of his travel attire, but she could recognize his cold and stern face. She could not help crying out, "Yang Xiaowei!" Li Xinyu knew that this person had helped her family. If not for this person, her father might not have been able to return to Luoyang alive, and she would never have had the chance to become a princess. However, hearing Yang Fan's stiff tone, she was still displeased. She said coldly, "Yang Xiaowei, this is my family's private affairs. Please do not interfere." Yang Fan said coldly, "Junju seems to have not heard clearly. Right now, this official is the investigating misconduct disposal envoy. This official can interfere with anything that is unjust and illegal. The law of duel states that if a wife beats her husband, she will be punished for a year. If the injury is serious, she will be punished with 3 levels of fighting injuries. If the nose of another person is destroyed, she will be punished for a year. If the tongue is broken, it will flow for 3,000 li. This official was once a minister of the Ministry of Justice. What I say is definitely not false. Is Junju not afraid of violating the laws of the country?" Chapter 878. Li Xinyu was shocked and took 2 steps back. She put on a brave front and said, You dare! I am the daughter of the Prince of Luling. I am the granddaughter of the current emperor. You can't do this to me." Before Yang Fan could speak, Pei Sun, who had been dumbstruck all this time, was suddenly enlightened. He jumped up and shouted, "That's right! I want to complain. I want to complain. With a fierce wife like this, how can I live in the future? I want to complain to His Majesty the Emperor." Pei Sun turned around and walked away. His hands were still tied behind his back. As he walked, he looked like a martyr who was about to step onto the execution ground. Seeing this, Yang Fan secretly let out a sigh of relief. Although he was not ashamed of Ian Junju's tyrannical and cruel methods, could a Junju really rule the court? It was simply impossible. It would be for the best if this young Master Pei could think of complaining to the emperor. This matter should be left to the emperor to resolve. Seeing Pei Sun's actions, Li Xinyu angrily said, "Bring him back for me." Yang Fan waved his hand. Immediately several imperial bodyguards came forward with their horses and blocked in front of them. Li Xinyu angrily said, "Yang Fan, are you really going against this Junju?" Yang Fan slightly bowed on the horse and calmly and forcefully replied, "This is Yang's duty. I have no choice but to do it." Good. Li Xinyu was so angry that her entire body was trembling. However, Yang Fan was an official of the court and not a subordinate of her Junju Fu. She thought that no one would dare to disobey her. If he really disobeyed her, she didn't know what authority she had and what she could do to him. Just as she was at a loss, another group of people galloped over from the distance. This group was a group of infantry, all of them wearing straw raincoats. The general at the front was riding a horse. Although he was also wearing a straw raincoat, it could not hide the extraordinary armor on his body. When he saw the situation on the street, he suddenly called out in surprise, "Yi and Junju, why are you here? What is going on?" Li Xinyu turned her head to look and exclaimed happily, "Brother-in-law, quickly come and help me. This young Fan is going too far." The general rode his horse closer and glanced at Yang Fan. He said coldly, "You're so impressive. How dare you be so rude to a princess?" Yang Fan looked at him and frowned. "Who are you?" The man proudly said, "I am the left guard of Jin Wu Gua Yi Wei Jia. I am in charge of the left guard of Jin Wu Gua Yi Wei Jia. I am in charge of the left and right 6 streets of the capital. Who are you?" The drenched Pei Sun called out, "He is Consort Wei's nephew, Ian's brother-in-law. General Yang, help me. I want to file a complaint with the imperial court." At present, the Prince of Luling's daughter, Shindu Junju, was married to Wu Yanhui. Yongtai Junju was married to Wu Yanji, and Anil Junju was already engaged to Wu Chongxuan. There were 7 daughters in the family, and 3 of them were married to the Wu family. The originally life-or-death tension between the 2 families had been diluted by a series of happy events. For the time being, they were in a honeymoon period. This Wei Jia was consort Wei's nephew. When the Prince of Luling was out of luck, the Wei family was also implicated. Now that the Prince of Luling had returned to the capital and was about to be promoted to crown prince, the Wei family's political environment had also relaxed. This Wei Jia had obtained an official position in the Jinwu Guards. The Wu family had married 3 consort Wei's daughters in a row, so they couldn't very well not open the door for him. Hearing him state his identity, Yang Fan said, "This official is the commander of the 1,000 cavalry guards, Yang Fan. By imperial decree, I am concurrently serving as the capital's commissioner for rectifying misconduct and investigating irregularities. Today, when I passed by this place, I saw." Yang Fan recounted the entire sequence of events. Hearing this, Wei Jia also felt that this sister of his wife was a bit too domineering. However, he was consort Wei's nephew and could be considered a member of Princess Yi An's paternal family. At this time, he could only help his relatives and not help reason. Thus he said, "Speaking of which, this is only a princess's family matter. It would be best if General Yang did not interfere." Yang Fan said sternly, "A wife beating her husband in the middle of the street is immoral and has a vile influence. How can this be considered a princess's family matter? Moreover, Princess Yi and brazenly cut off a person's nose and mouth because her husband kept an outside pet, violating the law. This is not something that can be resolved with just a private matter. Since this official has seen it, there is no reason for me to stand by and watch." Wei Jia's gaze grew cold. In a cold voice, he said, "Is General Yang really going to interfere in this kind of family matter?" Yang Fan smiled coldly, his gentleness carrying a hint of toughness. "This official is determined to interfere in this matter. That Lady Qing had her nose and tongue cut off. Her entire life was ruined. It was very likely that she would commit suicide. Out of righteous indignation, Yang Fan was determined to interfere in this matter. He knew that it was impossible for Princess Yi and to be exiled according to the law. However, if he could punish her, it could be considered as finding some justice for Lady Qing. With this punishment, she would restrain herself if she wanted to bully others in the future. Moreover, ever since the Prince of Luling's family returned to the capital, they had inexplicably become cold and wary of him. This also made Yang Fan angry. He wanted to let the Prince of Luling's family know that he, Yang Fan, was not a soft persimmon that could be manipulated by anyone. If it could be said that Yang Fan had always been indifferent and easygoing towards power, then this time Shenmu's provocation had stimulated his sense of danger. He began to act like a wild beast patrolling his territory, beginning to possess a sense of territory and sovereignty. He needed to declare his existence. For him, the true danger came from the people he trusted. He had done a great favor for the Prince of Luling's family, but they had inexplicably become cold and wary of him. He had treated Shenmu like an elder brother, but Shenmu had secretly done something to him. In the past, his enemies had always been clear-cut. From the very beginning, he knew that they were his enemies. He had never felt this sense of danger. Now, all of this had deeply touched him, and his edge was beginning to shine. If he wanted to establish his own power, he needed prestige and the ability to rally supporters. He could no longer be like before, blindly lying low and relying on the protection of others. Hearing Yang Fan's reply, Wei Jie sneered and waved his hand, shouting, "Someone escort Princess Yi and Prince Pei back to the Fu." A group of golden guards immediately drew their spears and approached, intending to snatch Pei Sun back. Yang Fan's face turned cold as he shouted, "Protect Prince Pei!" Rin Wei and the others immediately urged their horses forward, pressing down on the sabers at their waists. Wei Jie was infuriated, saying, "The one surnamed Yang, this official is in charge of the Fu's subordinates, supervising the patrolling of the 6 streets to the left and right of the capital. Are you going to oppose me?" Yang Fan said in a carefree manner, "It seems that you don't understand. This official regulates the conduct of the public and investigates the wrongdoings of the people and civilians of Luoyang. All illegal and unjust matters are dealt with by this official. If you dare to obstruct this official from enforcing the law, this official will take you down as well." As a member of the Golden Guards, Wei Jie had long heard from his colleagues that Great General Wu Yizong seemed to be at odds with Yang Fan. With this backing, he was not afraid of Yang Fan. He was still thinking that, by standing out this time, he would definitely receive Wu Yizong's favor. Thus, with a clang, he unsheathed his sword. Holding his sword, Wei Jie proudly shouted, "The security of the capital has always been my responsibility. When has it ever been someone else's turn to dictate? Someone sees Prince pay back for me. Those who dare to resist die or be injured." Tit for tat, Yang Fan immediately gave the order, "Escort Prince Pei into the palace. Those who dare to obstruct, kill without mercy. As for this courageous Commandant Guai who dares to disobey this official's orders, take him down." Wei Jie was both shocked and angry. He shouted, "You dare to touch me?" "Why wouldn't I dare?" Before he could finish speaking, raindrops shot towards him. It turned out that Yang Fan had ripped off his woven raincoat and flung it at him. Before the woven raincoat reached him, the raindrops had already shot out, causing pain to his face. Wei Jie let out a loud "Ah!" and instinctively closed his eyes. The woven raincoat immediately covered his head. The raincoat was already heavy after being soaked in water, and with the strength of Yang Fan's wrist, it actually covered Wei Jie's face and threw him off his horse. Since the commander had already made a move, how could his subordinates dare to be careless? Immediately, the 2 sides began to fight. This group of Golden Guards had about 20 people. Other than Wei Jie, who was riding a horse, the rest were all foot soldiers. Behind Yang Fan, other than Ren Wei, there were only 6 people. However, these 6 people were all martial arts experts hired by the Hall of Succession with a large sum of money. In close combat, the number of people was small and the ground was muddy. This was the perfect opportunity for them to display their martial arts. In a short period of time, the 6 of them were more than enough to deal with the 20 over people. Wei Jie fell heavily onto the muddy ground and was dizzy from the fall, unable to distinguish north from south. Yang Fan said, "This person disobeyed my orders, using force to disobey the law. 30 strokes of the cane." Rin Wei used his saber to cut open the ropes that bound Pei Junma and helped him up onto Wei Jie's warhorse. He then walked in large strides to the side where a servant from the Junju Fu was standing. In his hand was a water and fire stick. Seeing the 2 groups of imperial soldiers fighting each other, he was dumbstruck. As soon as he saw Ren Wei approaching with a saber in hand, his legs went soft and he unconsciously knelt down on the mud, howling, "Sir, spare my life!" Ren Wei coldly snorted, and with one leg he picked up the water and fire stick in front of him and caught it in his hand. He turned around and walked towards Wei Jie. With a pung, the stick smashed down. Wei Jie, who was dizzy, woke up and gave a blood-curdling scream as he tried to jump up. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Ren Wei swept his stick across his calf. The strength of this blow was just right. Although it was not enough to break his legs, the pain penetrated into his bones. Wei Jie could no longer stand, and with a blood-curdling scream, he fell onto the muddy ground again, falling flat on his face like a dog eating shit. Ren Wei laughed. "That blow just now doesn't count." As he finished speaking, he swung his stick again. For a moment, the stick flew through the air, hitting Wei Jie's buttocks. The sound was no different from a foot stepping on the muddy ground. Rin Wei's use of the stick was not like the military's use of canes. There were intervals between each strike, and in his hands One could only see the shadow of the stick flying through the air, and the pung-pung sound was unceasing. Wei Jia wanted to scream, but he couldn't keep up with Ren Wei's rhythm. It was drizzling on the streets, but more and more commoners were gathering. Many of them didn't even bring their umbrellas. Those at the back were hopping forward to look, and each and every one of them was in high spirits, beaming with joy. With the population of Luoyang, fights in the alleys were a common occurrence. Large-scale fights on the streets were relatively rare. After all, the officials and patrolmen were keeping a close eye on the situation. If they accidentally got involved in the court, both sides would be in trouble. But today was different. The people fighting were all soldiers, and they were using swords and spears. This was a rare sight. It was really celebrating the new year. Yang Fan's subordinates had been with him for a long time, and they understood his intentions very well. When they saw that Yang Fan had even taken down County Commandant Gua Yi of the Jinwu Guards and caned him on the streets, they knew that he didn't want to be merciful. Moreover, he wanted to use this opportunity to establish his authority. Without any hesitation, they used their full strength. In a short while, the Jinwu Guards were all lying on the ground under the storm-like attacks of 1,000 horsemen and 6 imperial bodyguards. Although none of them died, they were all injured and rolling on the ground, screaming in pain. The remaining 6 or 7 quick-witted Jinwu Guards didn't care that their county commandant was being beaten, and they all ran far away. Chapter 879. While Yin Junju was domineering, that was only because of her arrogance that had swelled after her rise. She had stayed in the small mountain village for many years and thought that just because she had the noble status of being the descendant of the emperor, everyone in the world would respect her. Right now, Yang Fan did not give her any face at all. She stood there without any ideas. Ren Wei used the staff quickly, but his strength did not lessen at all. Because he used the staff too quickly, the pain had not been felt for long, so Wei Jia had not fainted yet. However, when Ren Wei finished his last strike and picked up the staff to leave, he had lost all feeling in his lower body. He could not even get up if he wanted to. Yang Fan threw off his straw cape. After knocking Wei Jia off the horse, he smiled slightly at Pei Juanma and raised his hand, saying, "Please." Pei Sun was extremely grateful. He was the son of a large family and had been arrogant since he was young. When had he ever been treated like this? Today he had been cut by Yin Junju on the street. It was a great humiliation. His heart ached even more when his beloved concubine's nose and tongue were cut off by Yin Junju. He immediately took his horse and followed Yang Fan to the palace. Yang Fan's military uniform was black. It was wet from the rain and shone slightly. It also had a metallic feel to it, causing him to appear ferocious on the horse. On the other hand, Yin Junju wore a silk dress and embroidered robe. Her feet were bare, and her hair was disheveled. She appeared to be in a sorry state as she stood on the ground. When Li Xinyu saw that Yang Fan had used violence and was protecting the Juanma with disdain, she did not know how to respond. She felt extremely wronged and could not help but shout, "Yang Fan! Remember, I will not let you off." Finishing, Li Xinyu left in tears. Wei Jia lay in the mud and called out weakly, "Yang Fan! Remember, I will not let you off." He and Li Xinyu did not know each other, but his words were extremely coincidental. He blurted them out right after Li Xinyu said them. However, his voice was weak and miserable, not as powerful as Li Xinyu's. Furthermore, he seemed to be imitating her, causing the surrounding crowd to roar with laughter. Yang Fan didn't even turn his head as he escorted Pei Juanma straight to the palace. As they traveled, Pei Sun couldn't help but weep when he thought about how his wife was so domineering and had been seen by so many people. If the scandal were to spread throughout the capital tomorrow, he wouldn't be able to raise his head in front of his friends and family. Seeing this, Yang Fan also felt that this young master of an aristocratic family who had married a daughter of the imperial family was somewhat pitiful. He couldn't help but say a few words of comfort. Pei Sun choked with sobs as he said, A few days ago, the shoe merchant Long Jiutao asked me to introduce him to Zhang Tongxiu. As a token of appreciation, he gave me 4 beautiful shoe girls. Considering the jealousy of my wife at home, I did not accept any of them. Which man lives as sullenly as I do? Qing Ye had been serving me since we were young. We loved each other and had long had an affair. I had originally planned to make her my concubine after taking her as my main wife. But because I married a Junju, I could only go back on my promise and set her up in an outer residence. I had already made her suffer greatly. Now, Yang Fan was a little disdainful of his incompetence. He spoke so passionately. He clearly knew that Miss Qingya's nose and tongue had been cut off and tortured. But wasn't he afraid of Injuinju's power and didn't dare to return to the workshop to visit first? His mouth still had to go along with his words. Junma has such a wife. It is truly unspeakably bitter. But as a Junju, there is no reason for her to divorce. Right now, it is best to ask the Emperor and the Prince of Luling to come forward and restrain her. Otherwise, in the future, when Yang Fan said this, he suddenly remembered that he had mentioned that there was a shoe merchant who had asked him to introduce him to Zhang Tongxiu. Zhang Tongxiu was second Zhang's cousin. The people who wanted to befriend Zhang Tongxiu were most likely doing so to build a relationship with second Zhang. But then again, the people who fawned on second Zhang were mostly officials and definitely not merchants. Even though most of the great merchants needed to befriend the government as a backer, second Zhang, who had lived in the palace for a long time, was definitely not as helpful to the merchants as an official in charge of the court. Second Zhang came from a prestigious family, and now his status was beyond words. His appetite had also grown. Befriending second Zhang required more than 10 times the cost of a court official, but the effect was far less than a court official. Which merchant would make such an unprofitable transaction? Also, this person was a shoe merchant. Even if he had business in the capital, his roots were still in shoe. In this era, a round trip to a different place would take a long time, at least half a year. The transmission of information was slow. Great merchants would not stay in a different place for long, so it was far less profitable for great merchants to open a branch in a different place than to ally with the local tyrants. What did a great merchant of shoe want to do with second Zhang, who was like the sun in the sky in the court, but had no influence locally? Also, this 9 sets of dragons clearly had no connection to second Zhang, and had no previous connection to the entire Zhang family. Why did he want to do this? If it was any other time, if Pei Sun said this casually, Yang Fan would just forget about it and would not take it to heart. However, for the past month, he had been planning the battle with the hidden sect, and his heart had been stretched taut. The more he pondered over Pei Sun's words, the more he felt that there was a profound meaning. In a short while, they arrived at the palace. Although Pei Sun was the county horse, he did not have a palace pass. Yang Fan instructed him to wait at the gate while he went to the palace to have an audience with the emperor. It was raining today, and although the temperature had dropped, the entire place was wet with nowhere to go. Wu Zetian was playing chess with Zhang Yiji on the lovely spring stage to relieve boredom. When she heard Yang Fan's statement, she was instantly displeased. She immediately threw down her chess piece and instructed him to bring the county horse into the palace. Most of the time, the relatives of the emperor were not as favored as the close officials of the emperor. How many relatives of the emperor could be as favored as Princess Taiping, who could enter and leave the palace at any time? Many relatives of the emperor had to go through a lot of trouble to ask someone to pass a message to them if they wanted to enter the palace. The emperor might not even meet them, so it was not as good as the close officials of the emperor who could speak at any time. Since young, the members of the imperial family could not get along with each other day and night like the brothers and sisters of ordinary families. Their blood ties were thin, and it was even harder to meet them after they grew up. Furthermore, after being instigated by the close officials, there were plenty of people who hated them and did not want to meet them or even treated them coldly. Therefore, even if they were relatives of the emperor, there were very few who were willing to offend the close officials of the emperor. Only Princess En, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, would be incomparably unyielding when she saw Yang Fan interfering. Wu Zetian ordered Yang Fan to bring the county horse into the palace. After thinking for a moment, she also asked a servant to summon the Prince of Luling. The Prince of Luling had been living in the East Palace and was next to the Crown Prince's younger brother. It was obvious that he was waiting for his brother to make room for him. However, the imperial court was more concerned about reputation, and he could not find a suitable opportunity. Hearing that the Empress had summoned him, the Prince of Luling hurriedly dressed himself and followed the young servant into the inner palace. He secretly stuffed some money into the young servant's hands and asked why his mother had summoned him. The young servant knew that he would definitely become the crown prince in the future, and then the son of heaven after that, so he did not dare to make things difficult for him. However, this young servant had been waiting outside the palace at the time, so he did not understand why the emperor had summoned him. The young servant thought for a moment and said, "This servant does not know either. I only know that General Yang Fan entered the palace for a while and then left in a hurry. The saint then sent word to summon your highness." This servant noticed that the saint seemed to be secretly angry. "Your highness should be a bit more careful." Li Xian's heart tightened when he heard this. Mother is displeased? Just what could have caused mother's displeasure? Yang Fan had just entered the lovely spring terrace, and mother immediately summoned me. Yang Fan must have said something. What could Yang Fan have said? Zhong Run said that Yang Fan and Wu Sansi have a close relationship, but Gua has already been betrothed to Prince Liang's daughter-in-law. Prince Liang will not harm me, will he? Li Xian arrived at the lovely spring terrace uneasily. He humbly bowed to his mother and asked, "May I know what instructions mother has for your son?" Wu Zetian's expression darkened. "Sit down, we do not know either. We will speak again when your son-in-law arrives." Yes. Li Xian retreated to the side. A servant brought a brocade stool over, and Li Xian sat down gently. He thought, son-in-law? I wonder which son-in-law it is, for mother to be so angry. Could it be the son-in-law of the Wu family? If it is just a family matter, the situation does not seem too serious. Li Xian waited for a while as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Then Yang Fan's voice came from outside the hall. "Your Majesty, Prince Pei has arrived." Li Xian thought anxiously, Prince Pei? Fortunately, although he had many daughters, only one was married into the Pei family. Li Xian immediately arrived at Pei Sen. Is this Xianyu's husband? Xianyu has the worst temperament among the daughters. Could it be that she had a quarrel with her husband? But what does this have to do with Yang Fan? Why is he the one reporting this? Just as Li Xian was thinking, Yang Fan walked in with Pei Sun. When he saw Pei Sun's appearance, Li Xian stood up in shock. He cried out involuntarily, What happened to you?" Pei Sun's hair was disheveled. His cheeks were red and swollen. There were even a few scratches on his face. He was wearing a set of undergarments. The undergarments were supposed to be white, but now they were black and yellow and covered in mud. The most ridiculous thing was that he was barefooted and his feet were also covered in mud. Yang Fan bowed and said, "This subject saw Prince Pei on the streets. Because this matter involves the emperor's family matters, this subject does not dare to act arbitrarily. Hence, this subject brought Prince Pei into the palace to be dealt with by your Majesty. This subject will take his leave." Earlier, Wu Zetian had only heard a few words from Yang Fan and knew that Pei Sun and his wife had fought on the streets. This was not proper, and it was a disgrace to the royal family. Thus, she was extremely displeased. Now that she saw the appearance of this grandson-in-law, even the usually valiant Wu Zetian was stunned. After Yang Fan finished his report, Wu Zetian subconsciously waved her hands and didn't even bother to speak to him. Just as Yang Fan was about to leave, he suddenly stopped and said, "This subject still has another matter to report." This official has another matter to report. On the streets, this official saw Yi and Junju riding on Pei Juanma and slapping him incessantly. She also ordered her servants to tie up Pei Juanma and wanted to cut off his hair as a substitute for his head. There were countless commoners watching, and it was truly improper. When this official wanted to help Pei Juanma out of trouble, there were soldiers of the Jin Wu Guards patrolling the streets. The general leading the troops seemed to be acquainted with Junju and thus received orders from Junju to obstruct this official. For the sake of law and discipline, this subject flogged the general 30 times on the streets. Wu Zetian didn't have the leisure to listen to him talk about this. She waved her hand and said impatiently, "This is just a small matter. You can handle it yourself. Jean appointed you as a sentinel to do this. There is no need to report this matter in the future. Leave." With a faint smile, Yang Fan nodded his head and said, "Yes." Li Xian still didn't know that the person Yang Fan flogged on the streets was his other son-in-law. He, the Prince of Luling, had 2 sons-in-law. Today, one had been beaten by his daughter and the other by Yang Fan. His face had already been completely lost. However, when he saw that Yang Fan hadn't even glanced at him from beginning to end, which was completely different from when he had escorted him back to the capital, he felt rather uncomfortable. He also knew that this must be because his own family had deliberately distanced themselves from Yang Fan, causing the other to feel disgust. At this time, however, he didn't have the time to reflect. After Yang Fan withdrew, he anxiously asked, "Sun, what happened to you?" Pei Sun knelt on the floor of the hall and wailed. "Pei Sun's life is short and unworthy of a descendant of the emperor. Your Majesty the Emperor, please have mercy and choose a better match for Junju." Yang Fan didn't care about how Wu Zetian would handle this family matter. After he left the palace, he immediately sent someone to the Ministry of Rites and sent a message to Shengguan Fei of the Ministry of Rites. Quickly investigate the origins of the 9 sets of identities of the shoe merchant dragon. Chapter 880. The news of Yi and Junju chasing her husband in the rain, which eventually developed into a fierce battle between the 1,000 horsemen and the Jinwu guards, was enthusiastically spread by the common people of Luoyang. Soon it became a household name, and the dignity of the imperial family was completely gone. Wu Zetian and Li Xian, the Prince of Luling, were also frightened by Yi and Junju's valiant behavior. After the shock, they became furious. The imperial family wanted face, and it was not easy for the daughters of the imperial family to marry. Now that their reputation was even worse, who would the daughters of the imperial family marry in the future? The aristocratic families had always been dismissive of the imperial daughters, and the scholars with a future kept a respectful distance from the imperial daughters. Instead, they circled around the noble aristocratic families like smelly flies. All of this had long made the imperial family unhappy. In the end, those imperial princesses were so troublesome. It was fine if they only had a private imperial examination and secretly had a lover, but now they had even publicly beaten their husband. The imperial family was supposed to be an example to the world, but didn't they become the laughingstock of the world? Before Pei Juanma's snot and tears could finish complaining, Wu Zetian had drawn up the punishment measures, and Junju would be demoted to Yi and Junju, and the rules and etiquette would all be lowered by 1 grade. Originally, the Junju had a salary of 1st rank, but now she was demoted to 2nd rank. Wu Zetian also selected 3 female officials from the palace for her. One would lecture on Banjiu's women's precepts, one would lecture on the women's rules, written by Empress Zhangsun of the Tang Dynasty, and one would lecture on the essentials of internal conduct, written by Emperor Zetian of the current dynasty. Wu Zetian vowed to teach her to be a good wife and mother, so that she would not embarrass the imperial family again. As for Pei Sun, having a mistress was also a mistake, so he was punished as well. He was demoted from the capital and appointed as the provincial governor of Feng province. In fact, this was a kind of compensation for his apparent demotion, but hidden promotion. After Ma Shang-Junju of Pei County, he was promoted to a 5th-rank official to disperse the court. He had no real power, and his official position was not high. Now he became the provincial governor of Feng Province, a 4th-rank local official. Furthermore, the scenery in Pang Province was beautiful and rich. Prince Pei would return to the capital sooner or later, so he was being demoted but actually rewarded. That day, there was another Wei Juanma who had been beaten, and his ending was even worse than Pei Juanma. Both his buttocks had been smashed, and he had to be carried home. Ex-Ayan Peng Junju, who had just been married and was sticking to her husband like glue, felt her heart ache so much that tears rolled down her face. She couldn't resist running to the palace to see her parents and viciously complaining about Yang Fan. That day, the one who had attracted the most attention was the Junju beating her husband. Yang Fan and Wei Jia, who had not announced a status as the Junju, were ignored by the common people and did not spread among the people. Now, they wanted Li Dan to take the initiative to explain this matter to the emperor. Hadn't their family suffered enough humiliation? After being scolded by his mother, Li Xiangang didn't dare to look for trouble. He could only scold his daughter and tell her to restrain her husband. He told her not to get too close to Wu Yizong and not to provoke Yang Fan. When Wu Yizong heard that Wei Jia had been beaten, he went to visit. Commandant Guo Yi's position among his subordinates wasn't small, and he also had the status of a Junju. When Wei Jia saw the Grand General, he immediately complained tearfully and even added details to the story, saying that he had mentioned Grand General Wu, but Yang Fan didn't give him any face. Wu Yizong gritted his teeth as he listened. He was so angry that he wanted to immediately find trouble with Yang Fan, but charging into the camp was akin to mutiny, and he didn't dare. While the 1,000 cavalry were on duty in the capital, they were within the palace. Wu Yizong's sphere of influence was outside the palace. He didn't dare to charge into the palace and fight, and could only endure it for now. Pei Juanma heard that he had profited from a disaster. Not only could he leave that tigress, but he could also become a local tyrant. He couldn't help but be overjoyed and immediately went to find Yang Fan to thank him. He didn't forget that if it wasn't for Yang Fan's generous help, he wouldn't have remembered to complain to the emperor. Even if he remembered, he wouldn't have been able to enter the palace. He couldn't possibly cry and pray to the imperial palace, could he? If the matter really got out of hand, the dignity of the imperial family would be gone. Although the emperor would still punish Yan Junju, he wouldn't be able to have such a good job. Pei Juanma excitedly went to the Yang residence with generous gifts. After asking around, he found out that Yang Fan had already returned to the 1,000 cavalry camp. Pei Juanma left the gifts and personally went to the 1,000 cavalry camp in the north of the city. He insisted on thanking Yang Fan in person, and it could be said that he was very sincere. In the 1,000 cavalry camp, the soldiers were doing their daily drill on the drill ground. The sound of battle cries were uniform. Yang Fan walked slowly along the green path at the foot of the mountain. Beside him was Ran Wei, who was quietly reporting something to him. Yang Fan asked, "It's been more than a month. You still haven't found anything that can be used against them?" Ran Wei replied, "I won't hide it from sect head. Ever since the obvious and hidden sects fell out, both sides started to conceal their respective powers. Young Master Jiang came to Luoyang from Chang, and hoping to make a comeback here. In the end, because the 3 swindlers, old Nan Hanoi, Taoa Sifang, and the barbarian Mo Lei fell from power, his power was wiped out in one fell swoop. The obvious and hidden sects also learned a lesson from this. From then on, the identities of the officials that were supported and bribed by the obvious and hidden sects, as well as the officials that had never been exposed before, were only known by the few core figures in the sections. No one else had the chance to know. The few officials that belonged to the other side in the past had all fallen from power in a few fights. Now, it's very difficult to determine who's on the other side if we want to control them. Ran Wei sighed and continued. As for the hidden sect's weaknesses in other areas, Shinmu has returned to the Central Plains for more than a year. I'm afraid that all the loopholes that could be filled have been filled. Up until now, we haven't found any places that can be attacked." After Ren Wei finished speaking, he was afraid that Yang Fan wouldn't believe him and continued. "This matter concerns the future status of our obvious sect. Even though there are a few elders in the sect that are dissatisfied with sect head acting arbitrarily, they will definitely not drag sect head down on this matter. They said that they haven't found any weaknesses of the other side, and that should be the truth." Yang Fan nodded and slowly stopped walking. He asked, "What suggestions does Tian Shu have?" Ren Wei said, "They believe that rather than casting a wide net and investigating aimlessly, it will waste time and effort with little results. It is better to focus on one point." "What point?" "Food." "The reason?" "Food is the foundation of the imperial court, and it is also an important method for me to influence the imperial court. Once the scale is large, it will not be easy to hide everything. Therefore, if we start from this aspect, we should be able to obtain some results. Also, Shinmu and young Master Jiang once fought over food, and then he was sent to exile in Luo." Before he finished speaking, Yang Fan started to smile. He had already secretly sent people out of the capital with the goal of food. However, he hadn't thought of the first reason that Tian Shu thought of. The reason he set his target on food was because he thought of the second reason. In the Battle of Chang'an 2 years ago, the weapons that both sides used were food. In that vicious battle, logically, the obvious sect had the advantage and was much stronger than the hidden sect. However, because young Master Jiang did not listen to honest advice and was obstinate and self-opinionated, and the succession hall was established by him with the full support of the Liu clan, no one could do anything to him. As a result, they fell into Shenmu's trap and suffered a crushing defeat. But to kill 1,000, one would lose 800. To defeat young Master Jiang, Shenmu's losses would not be small. After that, Shenmu was sent to Exen Luo. He did not have time to make up for the losses caused by using food in the battle, even though Shenmu had quietly returned to Chang. And last year, when he returned to the Central Plains, the Kaitans had rebelled and then the Tuju had invaded. The hundreds of thousands of troops of the imperial court had moved to the north and gathered large amounts of food from various places. The Guanzhong granary was the main gathering area. The war in the north had continued until last winter. In other words, during this period of time, in such a large environment, Shenmu had no way to make up for the problems that had occurred with food. The only thing Shenmu could do was wait until this year's autumn harvest had large amounts of surplus food. Right now, it was summer, and still far from the autumn harvest. Shenmu could not make a pile of food out of thin air. Therefore, starting from this direction should be the most correct direction. The reason that Yang Fan was happy was because, from the suggestion of Tian Shu, he was sure that the succession hall was now of the same mind as him. When a new emperor ascended the throne, and the military power was scattered and the throne was unstable, the most commonly used and effective method was to divert trouble from the outside. Through external wars that concerned the life and death of the entire interest group, they could consolidate the internal forces, establish prestige, sort out relationships, and control military power. He was the obvious sect lord, and this method was also applicable. As long as they were forced by the external crisis and listened to his orders and arrangements and planned for him wholeheartedly, when the external threat was resolved, his authority within the internal forces would be established. During this period of time, if anyone provoked him, he could use the fact that most people were forced to obey him due to the overall situation to easily kick the other party away with the least resistance and replace them with his own people. Good. This is a good idea. Let's start from this direction. Yang Fan clapped his hands in praise. He naturally did not have to say that he had already sent people to act. It was not a smart idea to let the people of Succession Hall discover that he did not trust them enough. Ren Wei said, "But there is one more thing. Our obvious sect has also used a large amount of food. If we want to make a fuss about this, How do we prevent the fire from coming to us? This is a problem. Yang Fan frowned and asked, Do we have a lot of holes? Ren Wei said, Not a lot. After all, the food has always been in our hands. While the hidden sect had secretly started to interfere with the food storage, they had to avoid our eyes and ears and did not dare to make too big of a move. Most of the food they obtained was given to Wu Hela, who was supported by them. Thus, they used much more storage than us. But just in case, we need to be clear about ourselves. Before this, we cannot launch a counterattack in case they become desperate and try to take us down with them. Yang Fan nodded and said, All right, have Heaven's Pivot draw up a detailed plan. On one hand, we will fill in our holes, and on the other hand, we will look for their holes. Whoever makes the first move will be able to influence the outcome of this battle. Yes. Ren Wei responded solemnly and turned to leave. Yang Fan walked to the front of the slope and looked up at the sky. The coolness from yesterday's heavy rain had been gradually dispelled by the sun in the sky, and the earth was once again hot and stuffy. Just as Yang Fan was about to rush back to his tent before the sun's power was fully unleashed, a junior colonel rushed over from afar and reported in a loud voice, Middle Commander, there is a prince consort Pei outside the Yuan Gate who wishes to see the general. Yang Fan was startled and asked curiously, Consort Pei, what is he doing here? That junior colonel said, I heard him say that he is indebted to the general's help, now that the imperial court has appointed him as the provincial governor of Feng Province. He is here to express his thanks. Feng Province. Yang Fan's eyes suddenly lit up. Among the prefectures in the Guangzhou Prefecture, the Feng Prefecture was a major grain-producing prefecture, and Lady Gu was headed there. If the provincial governor there could give him convenience, wouldn't he have more confidence in dealing with the hidden sect? Yang Fan looked at the sun that was gradually emitting blazing rays and smiled as he muttered to himself, Even the heavens are helping me. Elder Brother Shin, what do you have to fight against me? Chapter 881. Yang Fan came out of the gate to welcome him. As soon as Pei Junma saw Yang Fan, he immediately clasped his hands and said gratefully, I am indebted to General for your help, allowing me to avoid the humiliation of a woman. Today, I have been sent by the court to be the provincial governor of Pengzhou. Before I leave, I have specially come to express my gratitude to General. Yang Fan hurriedly said, This is my duty. There is no need for Pei Junma to be so polite. Pei Sun said with a smile, Now you are the county horse, county horse. Yang Fan smiled and said, The weather is hot. Please come into the tent to talk. Yang Fan invited Pei Sun into the commander's tent, and they sat down as host and guest. Pei Sun seemed to be in high spirits about this exile to Pengzhou. His words were torrential, and he was very talkative. Yang Fan followed his words and began to talk about Pengzhou. He found that this man, who had grown up in the capital and had never thought that he would one day be sent out, knew nothing about Pengzhou. Or rather, he only knew that it was an upper-class province. Agriculture and animal husbandry were developed, and it was rich in natural resources. He could be the Taiping governor for a few years and then return to the capital in glory. Other than this, he knew nothing about Pengzhou. He didn't even know where Pengzhou was, much less the various shady things that the officials, especially the subordinates of the local officials, could use their large network of connections to play around with the weak officials sent by the court. Yang Fan secretly furrowed his brows. A strong dragon would find it difficult to defeat a local snake. An astute and capable official would need a lot of effort to truly straighten out his thoughts. It was clearly unrealistic to count on this young master. However, he was the provincial governor of a province. With power in his hands, he could provide some convenience for Fan Xian. As for picking on Shen Mu's weak points, he probably could not count on him. This person was not worldly and lacked experience. It was better not to tell him his thoughts, lest he was exposed to those slippery old officials as soon as he arrived in Feng Province. For now, he might as well build a good relationship with him. When he needed help, he would cooperate fully. Thinking of this, Yang Fan suppressed the idea of telling Pei Junma to strictly inspect the treasury after he took office in Feng Province. He only talked with him about romance and the local people. Occasionally, he would mention some general knowledge that a ruler needed to know. Although Pei Junma lacked experience in this area, he was very enlightened. After listening attentively to Yang Fan's explanation for a long time, Pei Junma happily said, "Brother Yang is a military general and has never been a local official before. I didn't expect you to be so familiar with the local political affairs." Yang Fan smiled modestly. "Junma overpraises me. Actually, I don't know much about this. It's just that I have an advisor in my residence." "Haha, he was originally hired by me when I was the Minister of Justice to help me manage some matters. I've learned a few things from him." Hearing this, Pei Junma's eyes lit up and he hurriedly asked, "Brother Yang, is this advisor still in your residence?" Yang Fan's heart stirred and he said, "That's right. He doesn't have a suitable place to go at the moment, and we get along quite well. Although I don't have much use for him now. It's better to keep him in the residence and temporarily help me manage the accounts." "Haha, it's a bit of a waste of talent." Pei Junma slapped his thigh and happily said, "I won't hide it from Brother Yang. This time I've been sent out and I've really been blinded. I don't know how I should be an official or how I should do things. I've also heard people talk about the local petty officials deceiving their superiors and subordinates, making me a mere figurehead. I've been feeling very apprehensive. I don't know if Brother Yang is willing to part with him." Yang Fan stared at him deeply and suddenly smiled. "The advisor that I've hired is proficient in the field of politics and would be the best assistant for a local official. Now that he's in charge of the accounts in my residence, it's really a waste of talent. If Pei Junma wants to use him, I'm sure he'll be very willing." Pei Junma was overjoyed. "Since I've met Brother Yang, good things have happened one after another. Brother Yang is really my lucky star. Since that's the case, it's settled. I'll be leaving for Feng Province in a few days. In a while, I'll have to ask Brother to accompany me back to the capital and personally invite this mister." Yang Fan inwardly shook his head. This Pei Junma has a fiery temper. If a person like him were to go somewhere, he would really be toyed with by those old officials. I will send someone to assist him as an official, which is tantamount to having him under my control. Thinking of this, Yang Fan smiled and said, "Very good. It's just that it's noon today and we'll miss the hottest time of the day. It won't be too late to return to the city. I'll get someone to prepare a table and you and I can drink and chat." While he was preparing wine and a banquet, Yang Fan found a gap and left the commander's tent. He called over a trusted imperial guard and instructed, "Quickly go to Tianshu and pick out a mister who's been an official and is familiar with the situation in Guangzhou. Quickly go to my residence and pretend to be sitting at the west table. I'll make arrangements." When the imperial guard heard this, he immediately prepared a horse and hurried back to the city. Yang Fan returned to the commander's tent and drank with Pei Junma. When the sun gradually set in the west and the wind carried a slight chill, Yang Fan and Pei Junma went out of the gate and headed straight for the capital. Pei Junma was slightly drunk, and when the wind blew, he felt extremely carefree. He was like a bird that had broken free from its fences and was very happy. The two of them entered Luoyang from the Anqi Gate and crossed the long bridge of the Luo River. After passing 2 squares, they suddenly saw a few badly battered soldiers supporting each other as they walked. When Yang Fan saw that they were wearing black military uniforms, which were very different from the ordinary imperial guards, he immediately knew that they were his subordinates. He couldn't help but be surprised and reined in his horse to wait. When he saw the sorry state of those people, Yang Fan's face immediately darkened. When the soldiers saw Yang Fan, they couldn't help but be overjoyed and rushed to the front of their horses, kneeling on the ground and loudly complaining about their injustice. They were all talking at once, and Yang Fan couldn't hear them clearly. He couldn't help but sternly shout, "Shut up!" Yang Fan swept his eyes over them and saw that one of them was a cook who was covering his mouth with his hand and had a nosebleed. Pointing his horsewhip at him, he shouted, "You speak!" The cook's face was covered in blood as he reported, "Middle Commander, we originally wanted to go to the southern city to play and then return to the barracks. We didn't expect to meet the Jinwu guards, and they purposely bumped into us. We only cursed them once, and they swarmed us and beat us up. We beg for General to give us justice." Yang Fan's face was as dark as water as he coldly asked, "They beat you, and you are going to let them beat you up?" The cook replied, "They patrol the streets with 10 to 20 people, which is several times more than me. Moreover what?" The cook lowered his head under Yang Fan's stare and said, "Moreover, they are led by a Wright Street Patrol envoy. His rank is much higher than mine. This lowly one does not dare to resist." "Huh." Yang Fan laughed and lightly slapped the horsewhip in his palm a few times. He suddenly shouted, "Men!" Behind Yang Fan were 7 to 8 soldiers. Immediately, with a roar, Yang Fan pointed his horsewhip forward and shouted, "Each of you will be punished with 10 strokes of the cane. Beat them for me." Yes, the soldiers only cared about obeying the general's order. They jumped off their horses and went to the roadside shops to search for 2 large sticks. They pressed the soldiers who had just been beaten to the ground. The soldiers did not dare to resist and gritted their teeth as they received the punishment. After a round of beating, Yang Fan asked, "Do you know why this official beat you?" The cook's hands were on the ground as he gritted his teeth and said, "I know. This lowly one did not immediately return to the barracks after leaving my post and violated the law by wandering the streets. Nonsense. Think again." The cook was originally sullen, but after hearing Yang Fan's scolding, he couldn't help but be startled. After thinking for a while, he stuttered, It's because this lowly one had a conflict with the Jinwu guards. We fought on the streets and violated." Yang Fan slightly leaned forward and stared into his eyes. He said in a deep voice, "This official beat you for one reason. Remember this, because you have embarrassed Qianqi." "Ah." The cook lay on the ground and raised his head to look at Yang Fan with a stunned expression. Yang Fan used the horsewhip like a sword and pointed it at him. He shouted, "Who are you?" "You are Qianqi, the emperor's personal guard. Other than the emperor, who can beat you? You have been beaten, and even the emperor will be humiliated because of you. Remember this, whoever wants to bully you, go find them yourself. Don't come crying to me like a girl. I don't like it." The cook's face immediately turned red. He forcefully nodded his head and shouted, "This lowly one will remember." Yang Fan coldly looked at the soldiers who had just received the beating and said lightly, "He has a lot of people. Don't you have brothers? If you can't beat him with fewer people, go find your brothers for help. Do you need me to teach you this? What a bunch of idiots." Yang Fan turned his horse and walked past them. He only left behind a sentence, "Don't embarrass Qianqi. No matter how big the matter is, I will bear it." A few of the Qianqi soldiers who were beaten looked at Yang Fan's receding figure and felt their blood boil. It was until Yang Fan's figure disappeared at the end of the street that the cook jumped up. He forcefully wiped the blood from his nose and looked ferocious. He raised his arms and shouted, "Brothers, return to camp. They have a lot of people. Don't we have brothers?" "Yes, return to camp." A few of the soldiers who were beaten got up. They no longer limped, and their legs were no longer limping. They rushed towards the north of the city. They were all family. The soldiers had held back when they were beating them. They would not really beat them. Pei Junma followed behind Yang Fan and asked with concern, "The great general of Jinwu guards is the king of Hanoi. Will he?" Yang Fan said, "In this official's heart there is only the emperor." Yang Fan was not a reckless man. Yesterday, he saved Pei Junma and beat up Wei Junma, making enemies with the Li family. Early this morning, Wu Sansi found an excuse to send him a jar of Persian Sanla juice, a jar of Arabian Malong wine, and a jar of the highest quality Jiannan roasted spring. Wu Sansi's intention was very obvious. With him around, what big trouble could happen? Asking his brothers to retaliate was not only to regain their face and to help him regain his face. Why are soldiers as close as brothers and have such amazing cohesiveness? Why are soldiers loyal to their general and follow his orders? For these hot-blooded men, the most effective way to fight against the outsiders was to group up and fight with them. Pei Junma saw Yongfan's imposing manner and was extremely envious. He could not help but exclaim in admiration, "Older brother is so impressive. When can younger brother be as overbearing as you? Only then will I not be a man in vain." Yongfan thought, "I'm afraid what you want the most is to be a husband. It's a pity that you married such a domineering wife and have a royal family. Don't even think about it in this lifetime." But he said, "It's just a habit of martial artists. What's there to be envious of? When younger brother becomes the governor of a region, you will be able to govern the people, recruit talents, adjudicate cases, investigate traitors, appoint and dismiss officials. With a frown, hundreds of officials will bow down. With a raise of your hand, tens of thousands of people will worship you. That is truly domineering and awe-inspiring." When Pei Junma heard this, he was extremely fascinated. Chapter 882. When Yongfan returned to the manor, a newly appointed accountant was already waiting for him. The old man was not yet 60 years old and had a strong body. This person did not take the imperial examinations to become an official. At that time, only a few dozen people were admitted to the imperial examinations each time. More than half of them were stolen by the rich and powerful families. How could they satisfy the needs of a country's officials? Recommendation was also a way, but this old man did not have a backer. Therefore, he spent his entire life in the prefectures and counties. In the end, he only became a county registrar and retired. Don't look at his small position. A small county lieutenant's experience in official career and life might not be inferior to that of a prime minister. The only thing that mattered was whether he had the opportunity to enter the court and become an official. If Zhang Jianji continued to be a county lieutenant until he died, who would dare to say that he was a great talent? After Yongfan passed down the order, the old teachers of Tianshu recommended him. This person had been in Guangzhou when he was an official and was very clear about the geography and the people there. He was also very clear about the hidden rules of the local government and the various methods that petty officials and their subordinates used to deal with high-ranking officials. If he was chosen, Pei Junma would not be fooled by his subordinates into not knowing what was going on and not be a complete figurehead. The so-called advisor was also known as the advisor in later generations, but at that time there was no such title. As an advisor, he had to give advice to the ruler, participate in confidential matters, draft manuscripts, write memorials, deal with files, make official replies, follow orders, contact the government, and be relied on by the ruler as his left and right hand. Although the advisors did not have official titles and were not within the system of the court, they were the trusted aides, think tanks, and personal assistants of the ruler. The ruler entrusted them with heavy responsibilities and could not leave them. Although they were not officials themselves, they were in charge of important official affairs. Although they were assisting officials in governing, in reality, to a large extent, they were governing on behalf of the official. With this person by Pei Junma's side, to a certain extent, Yongfan had Feng province in his hands. Pei Junma happily welcomed this old man back to his manor and treated him like an honored guest. On Yongfan's side, Shangguan Fei also sent news in a timely manner. He had already inquired about the origins of the shoe merchant Long Jiutao. Not only did he find out about Long Jiutao, he also found out about the identities of Song Baozi and a few other shoe merchants. These people were all big merchants from the shoe region. Among them, there were 2 big merchants whose main business was food. Other than that, Shangguan Fei did not manage to find out much. She did not discover any relationship between them and Xinmu. Yongfan ordered, "Continue to investigate and keep a close eye on them. These people aren't that simple. My advantage was in the officialdom, but there was one thing. My influence was mostly in the open, so they could be on guard. Their advantage is in the Jianghu. In the past, they were greatly suppressed by Xianzong, so they have a lot of power in the dark. It has the effect of catching the enemy off guard. We have to defend against it. The Shangguan family relied on Yang Fan to begin with. They also knew that the female head of the family, Shanghai Wan, was Yang Fan's woman, so they naturally listened to him. Without another word, they immediately replied to Shangguan Fei and continued to keep an eye on the shoe merchants who were renting out of the Liang Wang Fu. The cook who had been beaten by the Jinwu guards was called Yang Tianyu. He led a group of people back to the 1,000 cavalry camp to complain to his brothers about his grievances. He also explained Yang Fan's attitude. The group of brothers who had a common enemy immediately rubbed their palms together and followed them out of the camp. These people hurried to the southern city. Those Jinwu guards took a fruit from the owners and some melon, seeds from the owners, and were still patrolling the streets. Yang Tianyu did not say a word. With a call, a group of men from the 1,000 cavalry camp charged forward. The two sides began to fight in the southern city, causing chaos in the southern city. By the time Luoyang Commandant Tang Zong heard the news and led a group of fast-paced patrolmen to the southern city, the soldiers of the 1,000 cavalry camp had already arrived. They triumphantly left, leaving behind a few bruised and swollen Jinwu guards. County Commandant Tang led a group of people forward to investigate, but they were scolded by the Jinwu guards. Then they supported each other and left while cursing. "We're all soldiers. If you beat me, I'll use the same method to get back at you. Otherwise, how can I raise my head in front of the more than 20 guards of the capitals, North and South Yamen? Get the patrolmen to stand up for me? I can't afford to lose face like that. Those lowly servants can only bully the common people. They're nothing." Tang Zong really did not like to care about these trivial matters of the imperial army. But when he heard those Jinwu guards go back and threaten to get back at the 1,000 cavalry camp, he was worried. If this really developed into a large-scale armed brawl, although the scale of the brawl was not small anymore, he, as the Luoyang commandant, would have to bear the responsibility. But the victim was the Lord of Hanoi, the great general of the Jinwu guards, Wu Yizong. Would they need him to step in? Without the victim, this matter would be difficult to handle. Moreover, the one who beat them up was the 1,000 cavalry camp. The 1,000 cavalry camp was not even under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of War or the Political Affairs Hall. What right did the Luoyang prefecture have to detain them for questioning? When soldiers broke the law, it was not up to the civil yamen to intervene. The 1,000 cavalry camp was an extremely special existence in the army. Perhaps it would be useful to report this to the Prince of Jian or the great general of the Yulin Guard, Wu Yui. Between the Prince of Jian and the Lord of Hanoi, he, the Luoyang commandant, could not even be considered a judge. He was just a little brat. He would only go find trouble in front of these two Wu Wangya if he had nothing better to do. Helpless, Tang Zong could only clean up the scene and lead his group of people away in embarrassment. The Jinwu guards, Right Street Patrol envoy, who was beaten up, was called Ding Sheng. His martial arts skills were relatively high, and he had his subordinates to protect him. His injuries were not serious. However, when he returned to the Jinwu guards' camp, he was carried to see Wu Yizong. Wu Yizong did not care who provoked him first. Once he heard that his men had been punished by Yang Fan one after another, and that his face had been completely shredded, he could only fly into a rage. He immediately wanted to find Yang Fan to settle the score. Ding Sheng hurriedly stopped him. "General, you must not." Wu Yizong looked at him and said, "Why not? Do you think I am afraid of him?" Ding Sheng said, "General has repeatedly tried to make things difficult for him, but he has resolved every time. It is not that General's power and influence is not as great as his, but because we have not taken the initiative to be reasonable." Wu Yizong glared at him and said, "Does this prince need to reason with him?" Ding Sheng bitterly smiled, "But he is not an ordinary person. Once this matter is blown up, it will be up to the emperor to decide. Once this matter is brought before the emperor, We will not reason with him. Is that all right?" Wu Yizong stared at him and said, "What sly idea do you have this time?" Ding Sheng snickered and said, "On the way back, this lowly official has thought of a plan. We can ruthlessly punish him and at the same time make him unable to say anything." Wu Yizong unhappily said, "When did you become so fussy? If you have something to fart, just say it." After sending off Pei Junma and his new aides, Yang Fan stayed at home on the same day. In the evening of the same day, 1,000 imperial guards came to the residence and reported to Yang Fan that the palace will be sending more people tomorrow. They also invited Yang Fan to be on duty in the palace. Yang Fan thought for a moment. Tomorrow is not the date of the Grand Court Conference. Moreover, the court conference has just begun today. According to the rules, tomorrow should be a rest. So he asked, "What is going on in the palace tomorrow?" The Imperial Guard replied, "There will be a great banquet in the palace tomorrow. I hear that the prime ministers and the princes will all be present." Yang Fan understood and nodded. "I understand. Tomorrow morning, I will enter the palace." After the Imperial Guard left, Yang Fan thought for a while and felt that something was about to happen. Just as he was about to send someone to investigate, Shangguan Fei of the Bureau of Rights came to visit. Only now did Yang Fan suddenly understand. Shangguan Fei said, "Through Princess Taiping's matchmaking, His Majesty will be holding a family banquet tomorrow. But the prime ministers will also be present. The Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Luling will both be there." "Perhaps." Yang Fan nodded thoughtfully and said, "Yes. The Prince of Luling has been back in the capital for some time. This is probably to inform the prime ministers before the official succession change." Shangguan Fei smiled. General truly guessed correctly. If this were not the case, there would be no other explanation. It's rare for General to return to the estate, and you must enter the palace tomorrow morning. Rest early. This lowly official bids farewell. Yang Fan said, "Since you've already come, why don't you leave after dinner? Let's drink a cup or two." Shangguan Fei said, "The Bureau of Rights has sent this lowly official to the palace tomorrow. I don't dare to delay matters. Another day, another day." Early the next morning, Yang Fan went to the palace to dispatch guards and arrange for defense. There was no court session today. Those attending the banquet had to enter the palace through the black tortoise gate at the back of the palace, so the arrangements at the black tortoise gate were especially strict. By the time the sun was high in the sky, those attending the banquet began to arrive. Li Jingxiu rode his horse toward the palace, his brow tightly furrowed. Logically speaking, he should not have had the right to attend the emperor's family banquet today, but the palace had specifically chosen his name. This was a special honor, and he should be happy. However, he knew the reason why the emperor favored him so much. The emperor had hinted to him that he wanted him to marry again, to marry Zhang Yiji's mother, Lady Zhang. Li Jingxiu was very satisfied with his wife. She came from a noble family, gentle and virtuous. To ask him to marry someone else, and the other party was a few years older than him, he really did not want to. More importantly, he had the reputation of being the capital's most distinguished man. In addition to his talent, his future was guaranteed. If he married Zhang Yiji's mother, it would inevitably give people a feeling that he was lucky to advance. He would become the laughingstock of the capital, and he would not be able to lift his head in front of his relatives and friends. To Li Jingxiu, who cherished his reputation and had become a celebrity in the capital, this was an intolerable loss. But the emperor had come forward. How could he not agree? If he did not agree, based on how much Zhang Yiji was favored by the emperor, his future would be ruined. The black tortoise gate was just around the corner. Li Jingxiu sighed bitterly. In the Shi Fang courtyard, the Zhang brothers who lived in the palace had already arrived. They had also invited a few friends. Because the honored guests had not arrived, the banquet had not started, so they were playing chess with their friends. Zhang Yiji played white first. Opposite him was a middle-aged man. Facing Zhang Yiji's chess moves, He was constantly frowning and repeatedly muttering to himself. It was obvious that he could not win. Zhang Changzong and the other chess watchers saw him racking his brains. But after a long time he could not make a move. They could not help laughing incessantly. Yang Fan patrolled to this point and was quite surprised. He summoned an imperial bodyguard and asked, "Today is the emperor's family banquet. Not everyone can come. Who is the person playing chess with Zhang Fengchen?" The soldier replied, "He is Zhang Fengchen's friend. Listening to his accent, he seems to be from Shu. I think he is called Songbazi." Yang Fan's heart tightened. Songbazi? Isn't it just a few Shu merchants? These people are already acquainted with Zhang Yiji so quickly. Unexpectedly, they were invited into the palace to participate in the emperor's family banquet. Yang Fan raised his head to look, and just happened to see the Minister of Rites, Shang Guanfei, was giving directions in the distance, arranging the musicians. Immediately an idea came to his mind, and he immediately walked toward her. Chapter 883. Wei Yuanzhong, Yao Chong, Wei Engshi, Lu Yuanfang, and the other prime ministers arrived. These officials were experienced and had a good grasp of time. They arrived at the Black Tortoise Gate almost at the same time. They got off the ox cart and walked toward the palace. As they walked, they talked cheerfully and wittily. Just as they were about to reach Fragrance Courtyard, they suddenly heard someone shouting angrily at the bottom of the vine rockery in front of them, "Outrageous! Such an unruly thing. What will happen if it gets out? I want to remonstrate with the emperor." The prime ministers were astonished. Wei Yuanzhong made a gesture, and the prime ministers stopped in their tracks and listened attentively. The servant leading the way saw the prime minister stop and did not dare to make any noise. Someone from the vines said, "Today the emperor and the prime ministers will attend the palace banquet. They are all nobles. Shangjia is a lowly person, a low-ranked official. How can you sit together with nobles and nobles?" At this time he heard another person say, "Dr. Shangguan, calm down, calm down. What you said is reasonable, but can you interfere in this matter? Those shoe merchants are Zhang Fengchen's honored guests. If you go to the emperor to remonstrate, won't you be asking for trouble?" The first person said passionately, "When justice is at hand, there is no need to fear life and death." Another person said with a bitter smile, "Life and death are not involved. But it is not easy for you to be an official. If you lose your position because of this, you will not be able to serve the court. Why bother? Not to mention you, Zhang Fengchen is favored by the emperor. Even if the prime ministers come, I am afraid they will pretend to be deaf and dumb and pretend those people do not exist. The prime ministers are not willing to ask for trouble. Why do you have to meddle? I am the guest of the Ministry of Rites. All right. Calm down. Quickly arrange your errand. In your position, you must plan your own affairs. This is true, but today the prime ministers are here. Even if there is something wrong, it is not up to a small guest of the Ministry of Rites to take action. Quickly go and do your work." Following the sound, the two of them went further and further away. Not long after, the two of them bypassed the rockery and wisteria and appeared at the Moon Gate. Wei Yuanzhong squinted his eyes to take a look and recognized one of them as the recently popular commander of the 1,000 Horseman Guards, Yang Fan, and the other was the Minister of Rites, Shang Guanfei. Yao Chong turned around and frowned. "Zhang Yiji actually brought the merchants into the palace for the palace banquet today?" Lu Yuanfang stroked his beard and said, "A few days ago, I heard someone say that a magnate from Shu presented a treasure to Zhang Tongxiu. The pearl is the size of a bowl, and the coral is about 7 feet long. It is unbelievable. Now that you've said it, it seems that there really was a merchant who came to the Zhang residence to bribe the second Zhang." Wei Engshi suddenly said, "Just like that, a bunch of lowly merchants can stand proudly in the imperial court." Lu Yuanfang smiled bitterly. "In the end, it was Zhang Fengchen who invited us. As long as your majesty is not displeased, Wei Engshi said, "As prime ministers, we assist the Son of Heaven and appease the officials. How can we sit by and watch as the court rules are overturned and the palace is in chaos without saying a word? Finished speaking. He waved his sleeve and walked away. Wei Yuanzhong and Yao Chong looked at each other and slowly followed. Wei Angshi had just entered the political affairs hall, so it was most suitable for him to take charge of this matter. If he angered Tianyan, then everyone would come forward to mediate for him. Wei Angshi took the lead and entered the fragrance courtyard. Seeing the prime ministers arrive, Shangguan Fei quickly went forward to greet them. His face was still faintly angry. Wei Angshi looked at him appreciatively and said, "His Majesty is not here yet. We will take a look around first. You go and do your work." Finished speaking, he slowly strolled with Wei Yuanzhong and the others along the flower-shaded corridor. When the merchants were seated, they did not sit down, ashamed to be associated with them. After a while, Princess Taiping accompanied the Prince of Xiang, Li Dan, and the Prince of Luling, Li Xian, from a distance. Seeing this, the prime ministers came forward to greet them. They stood together and chatted for a while. Princess Taiping invited them to take a seat. Wei Angshi immediately restrained a smile and said, "Princess, please sit. We will wait for His Majesty to arrive and speak." The Prince of Xiang was about to take a seat when he heard that the tone was not right. He could not help but stop and exchange a glance with his brother Li Dan. Princess Taiping followed Wei Angshi's disdainful gaze and immediately discovered the reason. She could not help but frown. She had invited the two Zhangs because she knew how much the two Zhangs were favored by the emperor. Inviting them at this juncture would make the empress even happier. Who knew that these two brothers were so rude? Although Princess Taiping did not know the identity of those people, the significance of today's banquet was extraordinary. It was basically to replace the crown prince and blow the wind to the prime ministers. Through them, the foreign officials would be known to avoid unnecessary criticism in the process. However, the two Zhangs had called them friends, which was too outrageous. Princess Taiping was about to go over and inquire about the origins of those people when the chamberlain suddenly announced that the emperor had arrived. Everyone hurriedly went out to welcome him. Zhang Yiji, Songbati, and the others also stood up. As Wu Zetian arrived at the Shifang courtyard, two princes, one princess, the prime ministers, as well as the two Zhangs and the merchants, all came forward to welcome her. Wu Zetian did not know what the people standing behind the two Zhangs were for, but she did not ask. She only nodded to her children and the prime ministers in greeting. Since the princess had come to today's family banquet, she had to bring her son-in-law. Therefore, Wu Yuji also attended. Wu Zetian looked around and found that there were only two sons, one daughter, and a son-in-law from the Wu family. She suddenly felt a little strange and ordered, "Today is the family banquet. Call Sansi over as well." Immediately, the chamberlains bowed and left. Wu Zetian originally wanted to call Wu Qingxi over, but thinking of his condition, she could only shake her head and give up. "Everyone sit, make yourselves at home." Wu Zetian smiled and walked forward. Just as she was about to sit, Wei Angshi suddenly took a step forward and bowed deeply to the ground. He said solemnly, "Your Majesty, please wait. I have a memorial." Wu Zetian was surprised and smiled again. "Today, we are holding a family banquet and have invited all my beloved officials to drink with us. What matter has made official Wei so serious?" Wei Angshi said, "The emperor's family matters are also national affairs. Today, your Majesty is holding a family banquet. Your Highness, the princess, and the emperor's son-in-law are all present. We are honored to be invited and are overwhelmed by the favor. But..." Wei Angshi flicked his sleeve and pointed at Songbati, Long Jiutao, and the others who were bowing behind Zhang Yiji. He said, "These lowly merchants are disrespectful to the emperor's banquet. I ask the emperor to dismiss them." Songbati and the others turned pale with fright. Wu Zetian frowned and looked at Zhang Yiji. "They are merchants." Zhang Yiji did not expect Wei Angshi to not give him face. He couldn't help but be shocked and angry. The emperor had asked, and he had to answer. He could only reluctantly say, They're my friends, Su Mu Tianyan. I am just. Wei Engshi puffed out his chest and asked loudly, May I ask Zhang Fengchen, are they merchants? Zhang Yiji was furious and braced himself to say, Yes. Wei Engshi turned to Wu Zetian and cupped his fists. He said loudly, These lowly merchants should not attend this banquet. Your Majesty, please dismiss them. The Prime Minister was serious, and his words were well-founded. Wu Zetian was also very helpless. Furthermore, she had always valued her status. Zhang Yiji had brought a few merchants into the palace. She also felt that it was somewhat frivolous. She flicked her sleeves and said, Throw them out of the palace! Your Majesty, Your Majesty! Yang Fan, who was hiding somewhere, mysteriously appeared beside Wu Zetian. He acknowledged the order and walked in front of Songbati and the others. He said in a deep voice, Let's go! Songbati and the others looked at Zhang Yiji. Zhang Yiji's face was ashen and his eyes were spitting fire. However, there was nothing he could do. Songbati and the others could only awkwardly walk out. Yang Fan escorted them all the way to the Black Tortoise Gate and threw them out of the palace. Watching them leave, he then smiled and beckoned Renwei over. He whispered a few words to Renwei. Renwei nodded and immediately left the palace. Yang Fan looked at the back view of Songbati and the others who left in shame. He shook his head and said, Every profession has its own rules. The rules and regulations of the officialdom are much more complicated than other professions. If one doesn't understand the essentials and stubbornly walks into a dead end, the result would usually be bruised and bruised. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. The hidden sect has only risen for a short period of time. Shin Mu started from an insignificant background. He might be able to roam the pugilistic world with ease, but to mingle in the officialdom, he is truly inexperienced. Wu Sansi received the emperor's verbal order and quickly rushed to the palace. When he arrived at the Shifang courtyard, the banquet had already started. After 3 rounds of wine, the Zhang brothers might still be furious, but at least they had regained their composure on the surface. For dancers were dancing in front of the hall. Wu Zetian held her chopsticks and looked at them. She suddenly recalled that day at Dragon's Gate's EK, where her daughter danced with Shanghai Wan, or by the riverside of E River. She subconsciously looked at her daughter and then at Wan who was by the side. The two of them were as beautiful as before. Time didn't seem to have left any traces on their bodies. Their tender and smooth skin was something that even a 16-year-old girl would be envious of. Wu Zetian subconsciously caressed her face and sighed softly. She took care of herself very seriously. Until she was 50 years old, she still looked like a person in her 30s, bright and charming. However, time was ultimately a natural enemy that everyone couldn't defeat. Once she passed the age of 60, the speed of her aging suddenly accelerated. Even the best elixirs couldn't stop her body from aging. Even the best makeup couldn't cover up her wrinkles. She once again felt her old age. As a person who had been dominant her entire life, when she had to face a situation that she couldn't reverse, the feeling of helplessness was something that ordinary people couldn't understand. Her old eyes flitted across the faces of her son, daughter, son-in-law, nephew, and her lover, one by one as if she was dreaming. Everything in front of him seemed to be harmonious. But how long could this scene last? She knew very well that everything in front of her existed because of her existence. Yang Fan came back from outside. Seeing everything in front of the court, he slowed down his steps and slowly walked down the corridor. Wu Zetian, who was reminiscing and sighing, saw him, and suddenly there was a trace of warmth in her eyes. The person in front of her was not only the glue that she planned to use to continue to hold the Wu and Li families together after 100 years. From another perspective, he could also be considered her son-in-law. Wu Zetian subconsciously glanced at Taiping. She remembered that time at the riverside of E River, After Taiping had danced the Tuoji dance, he had struggled with her. Her daughter finally gave in, but she wasn't happy. Wu Zetian knew that. Recalling the past and touching the scene, Wu Zetian suddenly felt that her heart was abnormally fragile today. So, just as Yang Fan was about to flash down the corridor, Wu Zetian kindly called out to him, "Subject Yang, stop!" Yang Fan stopped in surprise and bowed. Wu Zetian said, "Take a seat and drink with the princes, the prime minister, the princess, and the son-in-law." Chapter 884. Yang Fan was slightly surprised by the special privilege of the Empress, but he saw a smile and kindness in Wu Zetian's eyes. The Empress, who was usually cold and stern, occasionally showed kindness. This made Yang Fan a little uncomfortable. The eunuch quickly added a mat and a table for him. Yang Fan sat down at the last seat. Wanner did not look at him. Everyone at the banquet was smart. If she was not careful, she would give herself away. After Yang Fan became the commander of 1,000 cavalry, he could walk around the palace as he pleased. He had more opportunities to meet with Wanner in private. Naturally, he was not as hungry as he had been for a long time. Princess Taiping, on the other hand, looked at Yang Fan with a smile. Everyone knew about the scandal between her and Yang Fan. The only one who needed to avoid it was the emperor's son-in-law. Even if the emperor's son-in-law saw it, he would only pretend not to see it. The banquet continued for about an hour. Wu Zetian put down her wine cup and slowly sat up. Shang Guanfei, who was standing to the side, saw this and quickly waved her hand. The music stopped and the dancers retreated. Everyone knew that the empress had something to say. They all stopped eating and sat up. Wu Zetian sighed and said softly, "I am old. This empire will be handed over to you sooner or later. I hope that all the officials will continue to work together to protect the court. I hope that the Wu and Li families can live in harmony forever." Wanner said, "Everything will be as the saint wishes." Everyone agreed. Wu Zetian nodded slowly. She looked at everyone and said, "Today there are the princes of the Wu and Li families, my daughter, the emperor's son-in-law, and the prime ministers. I like the happy and harmonious scene today. I hope that you will also be like this in the future. You will share weal and woe together and protect the Zhou dynasty that I have built with my own hands." Everyone left the banquet and bowed to the emperor. Wu Zetian gladly raised her cup and said, "Come, a full cup." After everyone had filled their cups with wine and raised them, Wu Zetian said emotionally, "Great Zhou is renewed and the country is stable, just like the sun rising from the east. From now on, as long as the princes and ministers follow the path that I have set, the country of Great Zhou will be protected for thousands of years." "Yes, your majesty." The crowd roared in agreement. Prince Xiang, Li Dan, suddenly stepped forward and clasped his hands. "Queen Mother, a wise sage once said that the safety of a country comes first from the lineal line, and the danger of the country comes first from meritorious service. Now that the great Zhou country is prosperous and the 4 seas are at peace, the crown prince position should be passed to the mother's eldest son. Going against this, the 4 seas are disappointed. My son and Qilong are Empress Mother's biological sons. Qilong was the elder brother, and his son was the younger brother. Qilong should be the crown prince. Qilong is benevolent, filial, dignified, and intelligent. He is the best candidate for crown prince. Your son is willing to resign from the crown prince position and asks Empress Mother to appoint Qilong as crown prince to the Eastern Palace, to reunite the country for tens of thousands of years, and to unite the 4 seas. The news of I Ching becoming the crown prince had long since spread. No one present was surprised. Only Wu Sanxi felt a little disappointed. Although he had long known that this day would come, he still couldn't help but feel dejected when he heard it for himself. Li Xian naturally, hurriedly left the banquet to decline. The 2 brothers pushed each other in front of the emperor, putting on a show of brotherly respect for each other. Only then did the prime ministers rush forward and unanimously approve of I Ching becoming the crown prince. Wu Sanxi and Wu Yuji also braced themselves and stood among them, saying things that they didn't mean. Wu Zetian slowly nodded her head and cheerfully said, "There is an ancient saying, a righteous father, a benevolent mother, a friendly brother, a respectful younger brother, and a filial son. We are comforted that my son can be like this. I approve of your memorial. Your elder brother will be the crown prince. Tomorrow he will announce it to the court and the world." Seeing that his mother had spoken, Li Xian stepped forward to receive the edict. This time it had to be more solemn. He knelt in front of his mother and solemnly accepted the edict. Wu Zetian said, "As a ruler, you should respect and cultivate your moral character. You should be upright in order to control your subordinates. You should be firm in order to resolve matters. You should be bright in order to observe the minute details. If you do not slack off, the world will change and the atmosphere will be harmonious. You are the crown prince. You should study the ways of a ruler in order to strive for a prosperous country and to help the people." Li Xian kowtowed and said, "I sincerely obey Empress Mother's teachings." Wu Zetian then said to the prime ministers, "All of you civil and military officials are assisting officials. You should wholeheartedly and faithfully assist the ruler. The ruler has the beauty of appointing virtuous people and accepting advice. The officials have the loyalty to assist the ruler in admonishing. We should discuss the rise and fall of the rebellion, the gains and losses, so that the ruler can understand the most important things. This can serve as a warning. If the ruler is wise and the officials are good, then the country can prosper." All the prime ministers, princes, and even the two Zhangs knelt on the ground to accept the edict. Because Wu Zetian's first words were "all of you civil and military officials," Yang Fan could not escape the military part. He could only follow the prime ministers in kneeling and kowtowing. Their solemn appearance had the aura of someone who cared about his life. From Yang Fan's point of view, this seemingly harmonious scene of the ruler and officials choosing the crown prince was just a play. Moreover, it was a play whose ending was already known. It was very boring. All the officials put on an impassioned appearance and cooperated with the emperor in completing this grand play of choosing the crown prince. All the prime ministers expressed their support and praise. Tomorrow, when the court officially chose the crown prince, there would be no need to worry about any accidents. Wu Zetian, who had long felt tired, returned to the inner palace. Once the emperor left, how could the officials sit there and eat and drink? All the princes, princesses, and even the prime ministers dispersed. Yang Fan walked out of the black tortoise gate. Ren Wei was already waiting there. Seeing him come out, he said, "This subordinate has already given the order. Tomorrow, the news will spread throughout Luoyang." Yang Fan smiled slightly and reminded, "It is not very useful for the people to know. It will only be useful if they want to know. If they don't want to know, then you can make a ruckus. What does it have to do with them? Let the people above know that the two Zhangs come from prestigious families and their friends are all officials. Only these people can truly influence them." Ren Wei's eyes revealed a smile. He nodded and said, "This subordinate understands. The reason why we have to go from the bottom to the top is to make it difficult for them to find out." The next day at the court assembly, a piece of news that had long been known by the court and the public was announced in a loud and heavy manner. He appointed the Prince of Luling, Li Xian, as the crown prince. The happiest person was probably in Junju, Li Xinyu, but the most unhappy person was also her. She was happy because she had just been demoted to a Junju and was immediately promoted back to a Junju. She was unhappy because her sisters had all been promoted to princess while she was still a Junju. This made Ian Junju, who had always liked to compare, very unhappy. However, she had just been punished. If she was directly promoted to princess, the emperor's lecture would become a big joke. She could only accept the fact that she was one level lower than her sisters. The replacement of the crown prince was already known by everyone. The only difference was that no one knew when it would happen. Therefore, the news of Li Dan resigning from the crown prince position and Li Xian ascending to the crown prince position did not cause much of a stir in the court and the public. Instead, the rumor about the shoe merchants Song Basi and Long Jiutao entering the capital to befriend the two Zhangs began to spread in an orderly manner. In the rumor that Yang Fan had inspired to spread, Song Basi, Long Jiutao, and the other shoe merchants were first described as unbearably vulgar and unceremonious nouveau riche. This was very much in line with the mentality of those who hated the rich. Then they concocted many vile acts of preying on the common people, shorting weight and raising prices in the process of doing business. This was also in line with the mentality of those noble scholars who had always looked down on merchants. At the same time, it aroused the hostility of the common people who had suffered at the hands of the unscrupulous merchants. Thus, these people all joined the ranks of those who spat. This was not all. There were also some words and short stories about what Song Basi, Long Jiutao, and the others had said after entering the capital that mocked the people of the capital. Of course, Song Basi and the others had not said such things, but the common people would not doubt who had been standing next to them and heard these words and knew so much. Song Basi and the others could not pull passers-by to explain one by one. Once this pot of shit was put on them, Song Basi and the others immediately became the public enemies of the capital. At that time, the regional barriers were very serious. Song Basi's regional discrimination speech could easily cause the local people to unite against a common enemy. Moreover, they were discriminating against the common people of the capital who had a strong sense of superiority. How could this be tolerated? For a moment, Song Basi and the others became the target of scorn. It was as if everyone wanted to beat them up. Not only did they not dare to go out, even those who spoke with a Shu accent did not dare to go out. Soon after, there was a vague mention of the day of the banquet in the palace. They were led into the palace, and the news that they were expelled by the emperor. In this little story, Song Basi and the others once again became unbearably vulgar and ignorant country bumpkins. They made a lot of jokes in the royal palace. How ugly they were. They became the laughingstock of the people of Jingdo. Then, under the inquiry of some people, some well-informed people began to reveal some information. It seemed that the person who led them into the palace was the descendant of the prime minister, the current Fengchen magistrate, young Master Zhang. Some people also mentioned that it was said that these tasteless country bumpkins had given young Master Zhang a golden bull because young Master Zhang was born in the year of the ox. Dirty water and ridicule began to slowly spread from Song Basi and the others to the Zhang brothers. At the beginning, Song Basi and the others were very angry at the rumors in the capital, but they did not take it to heart. In any case, it did not affect the overall situation, so they could only comfort themselves with the words, "The innocent will be innocent, the turbid will be turbid." But gradually, they found that Zhang Tongxiu and the other Zhang brothers began to alienate and ignore them. They no longer accepted their invitations, and when they came to visit, they were often closed the door. They finally realized the seriousness of the problem, but it was too late to change it. The Zhang brothers were disciples of a noble family and now had power and influence. Money was just icing on the cake for them and did not have much allure. Reputation was what they wanted to have and maintain the most. Now, the entire matter had been formed by a large amount of public opinion. Song Basi and the others were alone in a foreign land and could not defend themselves in the face of this overwhelming slander. They had already guessed that their identities had been exposed and that Xianzong had secretly done something, but they had never dreamed that Xianzong would use such a method. They had spent a lot of effort and money to get close to the Zhang brothers, but before they could use this relationship at all, they had been spat out. Don't slack off. When Yang Fan heard Runway's report, he imagined the anxious appearance of Song Basi and the others and couldn't help laughing. They have failed, so they will definitely think of another way. We have to keep an even closer eye on them. I still don't know why they have come, but their goal must be their greatest weakness. This subordinate understands. Rin Wei had just responded when the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Before the footsteps reached the door, the old steward's nervous voice came. "Ah Lang! Something has happened. Something big has happened.